Here's a tighter, cleaner rewrite that keeps the beats and trims the fluff. Ethan, 23, slept hard until his alarm cut through the room. He yawned, blinked at the thin band of morning light on the window, and pushed himself up. I wonder what today's got for me, he muttered, shuffling to the bathroom. The mirror showed a tall, lean guy with jet black hair and matching eyes. 6'2", broad-shouldered, fit from effort, not glory. He brushed, showered, and toweled off. Clothes from the wardrobe. Simple, clean. Breakfast was quick and forgettable. He grabbed his phone and keys. 9:23 a.m. Still time before class. Down the hall, into the elevator, then the quiet drop to the garage. The car started with a soft hum. He eased into traffic and let the waking city slide by. On campus, the lecture hall buzzed with idle talk. He scanned faces. No one he knew. He headed for a back seat until a voice rose above the noise. Hey, Ethan. Over here. Logan. Already parked with a few mutuals. Ethan walked over. Morning, he said. Nods all around. Logan shifted to make space. So, did you do the assignment? Lecture starts in 20. Let me copy, Logan said, hand already dipping toward Ethan's bag. Why is it always mine? Ethan sighed, batting the hand away. Then he unzipped the bag anyway and passed the booklet over. Hills grinned. Because we're friends. What other reason do you need? We don't have time for your complaints today, Ella added, already uncapping a pen. 20 minutes to copy the equations. Ethan shook his head. They used him to pad their grades, and he let them. Maybe that's what friends were for. Maybe not. The lecturer arrived. 3 hours crawled by. By 4, after back-to-back classes, he was done. He dropped into his car and let his head rest on the wheel. This university is killing me. He called his girlfriend. The Bluetooth clicked on. Hey, boo. You done? I can pick you up, he said. Yeah, babe. I'm finished, Jennifer said. I'll wait at my department. They'd been together 2 years. Marriage after graduation wasn't a fantasy anymore. It was a plan they didn't say too loudly. He pulled up. Jennifer stood outside in scrubs, tired but steady. How are you holding up? He asked as she got in. Exhausted, she said. Doctors don't have it easy. No wonder some get a God complex. If you get one, I'll open a church in your name, he said. She snorted, and some of the day fell off her shoulders. They headed to his place, showered, changed, and let the evening soften. Later, they drifted through neon streets, ate at a small spot, and played a few street games like it was still first year. They wandered into a jewelry store, fingers still linked. Glass cases held rows of rings, necklaces, and bracelets, all caught in warm light. Should we measure your ring finger now? Ethan asked, smiling at the display. For when I finally propose. That would spoil the surprise, she said. You won't know when, he said. No surprise ruined. He fastened a delicate necklace around her neck. She chose a couple of pieces she liked. He paid, and they stepped back into the night. Stay over, he asked in the car. I can't, she said. I have a 5 a.m. practical. If I sleep at your place, I'll wake up tired and sore. Not my fault I'm that good, he said. Whatever, she laughed. Drop me at the hostel. He did. At the curb, she leaned in, kissed him, and slipped out. See you tomorrow, she said. He watched her go, smiling despite the long day. Then he drove home, peeled off his clothes, and fell onto the bed in his boxers. After a few minutes of aimless scrolling, he plugged in his phone and let sleep take him. Here's a tighter, cleaner version with the same beats, written straight and grounded. Sunlight slipped through the window and warmed the room. A boy slept under the duvet. His eyelids twitched. He pushed himself up and sat there, eyes still closed, stretching the sleep out of his limbs. Nice stretch, he muttered. He opened his eyes, took in the room, and froze. How did I get here? His voice shook. Then another shock hit him. His voice sounded wrong. Lighter. He touched his throat and scanned the room again. This place looked like a royal suite. Soft bed, thick duvet, gold frames on the walls. Every piece of furniture expensive enough to make statement. He lifted his hands. Smaller than before, but somehow stronger. Skin too smooth. Too perfect. What is happening? He said, listening to the unfamiliar voice coming out of him. Ethan's thoughts spun. This was not his morning. He had a routine. Wake up. Go to lectures. Joke with his girlfriend. Sleep without worries. Then the word hit him. Transmigration. No way. He knew the trope from web novels and anime, but he had never wanted it. His life had been easy and good. Wealthy. Tall. Smart. Dating the brightest girl in the med department. No tragedy. No injustice. Nothing broken. Yes, he was an orphan, but he never chased the past. They left him. He let them stay gone. Jennifer's face cut through the fog. Her laugh. The way she stole glances during his lectures. 2 years together without a fight. She called their relationship utopia. Take me back, he thought. Take me back now. He accepted it anyway. Denial would not change a thing. What happened to Jennifer when he went missing? When his body was found? The thought hollowed him. He lay back and stared at the polished ceiling. Bloodshed. Power struggles. Family drama. The usual fantasy checklist. It never appealed to him. His real life had been better than any of that. After a few minutes, he stood and walked to the full-length mirror. He needed to see who he was now. A stranger looked back. 17 at most. 6'1", skin flawless. Eyes a deep violet that matched a tousled mop of hair. Sharp features. Too handsome for his own good. Lady killer, he thought dryly. Another problem rose fast. Where were the memories that were supposed to come with a new body? He glanced at the door. Curiosity urged him to open it. Caution kept him still. The room and his face screamed status. Probably a noble house. Better to wait for a maid or a butler and learn something before making a move. He turned toward the window. On his second step, pain slammed into his skull. He staggered, grabbed his head, and clenched his teeth to stop the scream. Then the vision started. Images flashed in shards. Faces. Halls. Voices. A life he had not lived poured into him like broken glass. Minutes dragged. The pain ebbed. He stayed crouched, breathing hard, then pushed himself upright. The memories were not his. Now they were. He had just watched the former owner's life end to end. The merge left him shaking. "You're kidding me," he whispered. His easy mode was gone. In its place stood a mess. Betrayals. Blood. A family web full of knives. Fate had yanked him out of comfort and dropped him into hell. No warning. No reason. No mercy.
Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support, we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
The body belonged to the son of a duke. More precisely, Asher Wargrave, the 10th child of the esteemed Wargrave lineage. The Wargraves, dukes of the Zerathorn Empire, were a family forged in the crucible of battle, a clan defined by warfare, renowned for their martial prowess and hardened by generations of conflict. Asher was 16, soon to turn 17. As the duke's 10th son, he commanded both respect and deference wherever he went. But in a household where excellence was the standard, mere birthright was not enough. The Wargraves were a family of prodigies. Every one of Asher's 9 siblings was a genius in their own right, as were his parents, uncles, and aunts. Mediocrity had no place in such a lineage. It was not enough to be talented. He was expected to be extraordinary. In truth, the Wargraves were less a noble family and more a lineage of monsters draped in glory. In this new world, every individual, noble or commoner alike, underwent an awakening upon reaching the age of 15. It was a universal rite of passage, one that transcended status or lineage. Yet, despite its inevitability, the true nature of the awakening remained a mystery to Ethan. Still, as an avid reader of fantasy novels, he possessed a general understanding of what it might entail. The process of awakening occurred at 15, but success was not guaranteed. Not everyone was able to awaken. Each person was granted up to 3 attempts at the ages of 15, 16, and 17. Should they fail all 3, their fate was sealed. They would forever remain ordinary, destined to live a life devoid of power or potential in a world that revered strength above all else. But Asher had done the unthinkable. He had failed his awakening at the age of 15. And that was where everything began to unravel. Though the world granted a second and even a third chance in the years that followed, failure, however temporary, was an unspoken disgrace within the Wargrave household. In a family where strength was not merely expected but demanded, such weakness was intolerable. This was not just any noble house. It was the domain of monsters, a lineage bred for war, where power was legacy and mediocrity is sin. After Asher failed his first awakening, the ridicule began. His siblings, who had never harbored affection for him to begin with, seized the opportunity to mock and belittle him. Love had no place among them, only ambition. Each was vying to become the next head of the Wargrave family, and Asher's failure made him an easy target. Even the servants, once courteous by duty, began to look upon him with thinly veiled disdain. Some of the maids had awakened on their first attempt, yet the youngest son of a duke, born into privilege and legacy, had not. In their eyes, he was a disgrace. But Asher did not yield. He did not crumble beneath their scorn or the weight of their contemptuous gazes. Instead, he turned inward and endured. He pushed his body beyond its limits, embraced the pain, and welcomed the silence. Day after day, he followed a merciless routine. Wake, eat, train, sleep, then repeat. No distractions, no excuses, just sheer discipline. When Asher turned 16, his second chance at awakening arrived. Every gaze was fixed on him, watchful, expectant, unforgiving. Could he redeem himself? Could he finally cast off the stain of his first failure? Even if he succeeded, the whispers would not vanish. The shadow of that first disgrace would linger. But what followed silenced even those whispers, replacing them with stunned disbelief. Asher failed again. A second failure, unthinkable, unforgivable. This time it broke him. He felt their stares, piercing, mocking, heavy with scorn. The weight of their disdain crushed him, and the cruel satisfaction in their eyes, the schadenfreude, was unbearable. He could no longer pretend to be unaffected. Retreating to his room, he shut out the world. For days, perhaps weeks, he did nothing but cry, eat, and drink. He drowned his sorrow in alcohol, desperate to blur the sharp edges of his reality. In that darkened room, surrounded by silence and the bitter scent of failure, Asher was no longer the 10th son of a duke. He was just a broken boy, clinging to the bottom of a well he could no longer climb out of. But none of it brought relief. The drinking, the tears, the isolation, it solved nothing. If anything, it pulled him deeper into the abyss, swallowing what remained of his resolve. Day after day, the same cruel routine unfolded. His siblings no longer needed to lift a hand against him. Their words, cutting, relentless, were far more effective than fists. Each passing comment chipped away at what little strength he had left. Eventually, Asher broke. One morning, unable to bear it any longer, he paid a maid to procure a drug. She didn't question him. She didn't dare to. It wasn't her place. She was but a mere maid. That night, Asher made his choice. He swallowed the drug, not out of recklessness, but with quiet, deliberate finality. For him, it was not a cry for help. It was an escape, a way to silence the voices, the judgment, the failure, a way to disappear from a world that had never offered him a place within it. Asher Wargrave, the 10th son of a duke, died not on the battlefield, but in a lonely room, defeated not by enemies, but by the weight of expectation and silence. Ethan felt Asher's emotions crash in him like a tidal wave, fleeting moments of joy, fierce determination, quiet resolve. Then sorrow, despair, and finally death. At least it wasn't a painful death. Ethan thought, his steps steady as he approached a small table. Resting atop, it was a bottle, half full of the very drug Asher had used, and beside it, a folded letter stained faintly at the edges. He didn't bother reading it. He already knew its contents. The memories were as vivid as if they were his own. Without hesitation, Ethan tossed the bottle aside and shredded the letter, letting the torn fragments flutter to the floor like discarded regrets. Despite having lived through Asher's final moments, Ethan could feel no lasting weight. The sorrow, the fear, the hopelessness, they belonged to Asher, not to him. and though they had touched him, they did not claim him. I wonder why none of Asher's memories carried any history of this world. Ethan mused as he moved toward the window. Outside, the compound exuded discipline and order. Armored guards patrolled the perimeter with mechanical precision, their eyes sharp and movements rehearsed. Maids and butlers drifted across the walkways with practiced grace, their steps silent, their expressions composed. Everything moved with the harmony of a well-oiled machine. Beyond them, tall, elegant trees stretched skyward, their branches twisting like serpents of green and gold. They dotted the landscape in spiraling formations, giving the estate a strange, cultivated beauty, as if even nature here had been trained to obey. Yet even in all its grandeur, it felt unfamiliar. Alien, beautiful but not his. If I jumped from here, would I truly die? Ethan wondered, eyes fixed on the distant ground below. Or would time simply rewind, dragging me back to the moment I awoke in this body? It was a strange thought, one that likely never crossed the minds of those who fantasized about reincarnation. While others might revel in the thrill of a second chance, Ethan's mind traveled a darker, more curious path. What if someone, granted a new life in a new world, chose to throw it away immediately? Would the force behind the reincarnation intervene? Would it stop them, desperate to protect whatever plan or design it had for them? Or would it let them die? Just like that. No resistance. No purpose. Just an end. The question gnawed at him. He felt no attachment to this life. Not yet. The emotions he had inherited from Asher had already faded into the background like a story read too many times. But somewhere in the back of his mind, the real question lingered. Would it end? Would I go back to Jennifer? Would I wake up once more in Asher's bed as if nothing had happened? The temptation to test the theory was real, dangerous, but real. Not born of despair, but of curiosity. The kind that could kill a man just as swiftly as any sword. Isn't this the part where I'm supposed to hear that ding, system activation sound? Right after I get my memories? Ethan muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. He furrowed his brow, sinking deeper into thought. Don't tell me I'm about to be the only transmigrator without a system. He paused, weighing the possibilities. Well, in some stories the systems only activate during the awakening. Guess I'll just have to wait for mine. With a resigned sigh, Ethan stepped away from a window, brushing off the nagging unease. I've been awake for over 30 minutes. Why hasn't a maid come by to check on me? Or at least to just greet me? He wondered silently. Before the question could linger much longer, a gentle knock echoed from the door, as if answering his unspoken curiosity. Ethan's gaze snapped toward the door at the sound of the knock. After a brief pause, he called out calmly, "Come in." The door opened with a soft creak, revealing a woman dressed in a maid's uniform. She appeared to be in her 40s, her movements measured and graceful. With a quiet step, she entered, gently closing the door behind her before lowering herself into a polite bow. "Good morning, young master," she greeted, her voice calm and measured, yet she deliberately avoided meeting Ethan's eyes. Ethan studied her quietly for a moment. He recognized her from the memories, the personal made a sign by the Duke himself. Her name was Lyra. Whenever the current head of the Wargrave family welcomed a new heir, it was customary to assign a personal maid or butler to the child. These attendants served not only as assistants, but also as protectors, silent guardians tasked with safeguarding the young master until their awakening. The true strength of these maids and butlers remained a mystery to outsiders. No child was ever permitted to leave the Duke's estate before awakening, and as a result, none of these attendants had ever been tested in combat. The law was ironclad, unfailing in its enforcement. Typically, their service would conclude when the young master reached 15 and successfully awakened. However, since Asher had failed the awakening twice, Lyra's duty extended indefinitely, binding her to serve him until he finally succeeded. "Good morning, Lyra." Ethan greeted with a neutral tone, offering a slight nod of acknowledgement. Lyra said nothing in response. She stepped forward, reaching to begin removing his clothes. Ethan's face immediately tightened into a frown. "Don't worry. I'll be taking my own baths from now on," he said firmly, halting her mid-motion. For a few moments, Lyra stared at him, her eyes filled with quiet confusion. Ethan understood why. She had cared for Asher since his birth, bathing him, dressing him, never missing a single day. But Ethan wasn't Asher. He couldn't let an elderly woman, nor anyone, for that matter, handle something so personal. It simply felt wrong and weird. "As you command, young master," Lyra replied softly, stepping back with a respectful bow. Ethan rose from the bed and made his way to the bathroom, guided by his memories. Though this world isn't technologically advanced, I'm glad I can still enjoy a proper bath, he thought. After some time, he emerged, feeling refreshed. Lyra was waiting patiently, holding a fresh set of clothes in her hands. Without a word or a touch, Ethan took the garments and dressed himself, determined to maintain his newfound independence. "Is my father in the estate?" Ethan asked, glancing at his reflection in the mirror. "The Primarch is present within the estate, young master," Lyra replied promptly. Ethan gave a slight nod in acknowledgement. "And which alcohol would you prefer today, young master?" Lyra inquired with quiet politeness. Ethan's thoughts stalled at her question. He knew from Asher's memories that after failing the second awakening, drinking had become a daily ritual, a desperate attempt to numb the growing despair. How hadn't this guy's physique deteriorated after all the alcohol he consumed? Ethan wondered, unable to comprehend how Asher's body still appeared stronger and more resilient than his own, even after an entire year of drinking and neglecting any real effort. Truly, a family of monsters, he thought, shaking his head in quiet disbelief. My 17th birthday is just a few days away. That means my third and final awakening is coming. I'll be making some changes before then. Don't bring me anything like alcohol anymore," Ethan said calmly, his voice steady. Lyra's eyes flickered with a sudden intensity as she studied him. Has his determination finally returned? She wondered silently, watching Ethan stand leisurely before the mirror. She knew all too well the stakes. If he failed this final awakening, banishment would be inevitable. And as someone bound to serve the young master until his awakening, that fate would be hers as well. His failure was shared, but his success would belong to him alone. "As you command, young master. I'll bring breakfast shortly." Lyra bowed respectfully before stepping out of the room. Ethan's gaze shifted away from the mirror as he turned and sank into a chair. His mind was already racing ahead, planning his next moves. With only a few days left until his awakening, there was no urgent need to train or prepare physically. He would simply wait for the day to arrive. He never once doubted that he would pass. Asher may have stumbled twice, but that failure did not extend to him simply because he occupied the same body. It seemed Asher took his own life just days before his final awakening. He had already resigned himself to failure before even trying. Ethan thought quietly, but he didn't judge Asher. That wasn't his place. Everyone faced reality differently. Some fled from it. Others embraced it, some prayed for deliverance, and a few simply stared it down, uncaring and unbothered. Though Ethan felt the weight of Asher's emotions, the despair, the anger, the desire for revenge before his final breath, he had no intention of carrying that burden for a stranger. He wouldn't waste his time chasing vengeance for someone who couldn't accept his own fate. The door creaked open as Lyra entered, pushing a cart laden with food toward Ethan. With swift, practiced motions, she arranged the dishes neatly on the table before him. "Come back in 20 minutes, Ethan said calmly, lifting his cutlery and beginning to eat. "I should start with the library," he thought between bites. "Since no information about this world came with the memories, that's where I'll find answers, right after breakfast." His movements were fluid, almost automatic, guided by the refined etiquette of nobility ingrained deep within Asher's body. I wonder what cliché twist this world might have, Ethan mused silently as he ate. Will demons invade the land? Or perhaps dungeons will appear everywhere. Maybe there's a towering spire, so tall it nearly pierces the heavens, with 100 floors of deadly trials. time slipped by unnoticed, and before he knew it, the 20 minutes had passed in an instant. Ethan dabbed his mouth with the table napkin provided, signaling he had finished his meal. The door creaked open behind him, and Lyra entered precisely 20 minutes later. With practiced grace, she cleared the table, gathering the empty dishes and neatly placing them onto the cart. Just as she prepared to wheel the cart back to the kitchen, Ethan's voice halted her. "Have another maid take care of that. You and I are going to the family library," he said, rising smoothly from his chair. "As you command, young master," Lyra replied, releasing the cart. She moved to the door, opened it with quiet precision, and Ethan strode through without a moment's pause. Ethan's eyes swept across the grand hall as he walked, attempting to maintain a composed expression, but he failed. A subtle glimmer danced in his gaze, his eyes shining like distant stars. The walls radiated with brilliance and color, as though someone polished them every moment of the day. Elegant light fixtures clung to the walls, their golden sheen giving the illusion of being gilded in actual gold. Some sections of the walls were made entirely of crystal-clear glass, while the floor was blanketed in a rich, red carpet that whispered of luxury with every step. Though Ethan had known wealth in his past life, what he now witnessed transcended affluence. This was opulence in its purest form. Lyra, walking a few steps behind, failed to notice the subtle shifts in Ethan's expression. Had she seen his face in that moment, she might have mistaken him for a man intoxicated by the sheer scent of wealth. In his early past life, Ethan had known only scarcity. Raised in an orphanage where even water was rationed, he had come to revere money, not merely as a luxury, but as a symbol of freedom and power. In his former world, wealth dictated influence. The richer one was, the stronger they stood. Although I'd love to explore every corner of this place, the library must take priority, Ethan mused inwardly. Ethan's gaze briefly settled on a maid approaching from ahead. At once, his features shifted into a mask of indifference. All children of the pre-march were known for their stoic, unreadable expressions, a trait Ethan had quickly observed from Asher's memory. Though he had no intention of permanently adopting their cold demeanor, now was not the time to stand out. Until he fully understood his current situation and status, playing along was the safest path. "Good morning, 10th son," the maid greeted, bowing respectfully. Ethan offered no reply. He walked past her without so much as a glance, perfectly imitating the aloofness expected of Asher. This was how Asher carried himself, detached, distant. For now, Ethan had no choice but to follow suit, lest he reveal his true nature too soon. According to Asher's memories, the male heirs are referred to as sons, while the females bear the title of moons. This world is fortunate feminism hasn't taken root. If it had, the backlash online would have been explosive, Ethan mused. "Young master, may I ask why we are heading to the library?" Lyra inquired, maintaining her respectful distance, 2 steps behind Ethan. Not too close to be intrusive, yet near enough to respond instantly if needed. In the Wargrave household, it was considered taboo for maids or butlers to question a young heir about anything outside their assigned duties. However, those personally appointed at the birth of a son or moon, the Primarch's children, were granted a rare exception. These select few served not only as attendants, but almost as a secondary parental figures and duties, their standing determined by the strength of their bond and the class of service they maintained with their charge. Lyra was one such attendant. "As you know, my final chance at awakening is only a few days away," Ethan said, his tone calm and measured. "I'm sure you've heard the rumors. Should I fail again, I'll be cast out from the family." He neither turned nor slowed his pace as he continued down the corridor. "I'm simply going to the library to find the most suitable place to live, should that outcome come to pass," he added, weaving the lie effortlessly into his words. He couldn't exactly tell Lyra the truth, that he was heading to the library to study the world's lore and gather information. That would only raise questions. Besides, if the countless novels he had read were anything to go by, exile was never as simple as it sounded. Ethan knew the moment he was declared banished, He wouldn't live to see the following day. Maybe not even the next hour. Even with Lyra by his side, he understood all too well they would send at least two individuals stronger than her to stall or neutralize her, just in case she decided to intervene. The other sons and moons wouldn't hesitate. The moment he stepped beyond the family gates, an accident would be waiting. Assassination was inevitable. Exile was simply, though silent, the gesture was sharper than any insult, an unspoken rebuke that cut deeper than words ever could. Thaurik stood frozen, stunned into silence, unable to believe what he had just witnessed. Behind Ethan, Lyra followed with a faint, knowing smile. After all, this was the first time Asher had ever dared to stand his ground. No words were exchanged, but the damage was unmistakably done. As Ethan stepped into the Grand Library, his thoughts drifted back to his recent encounter with the enigmatic Ninth Sunday. He found himself unable to reconcile the reality before him with the image of young masters he had long encountered in novels. These scions of influential families possessed wealth, power, and undeniable talent. Yet, rather than savoring the privileges their lineage afforded, they squandered their time and energy tormenting those they deemed beneath them, driven solely by a cruel sense of superiority. Can they not simply relish the privileges bestowed upon them at birth, marry as many women as they desire, indulge in leisure, and squander their fortunes without malice? Ethan mused with a weary sigh as he continued walking. At least, I doubt I'll cross paths with him again anytime soon. It seemed he was just departing the library. He reflected quietly, drawing near to a table. A man sat carelessly, legs casually draped atop the table. His hair was a striking contrast of black interspersed with silver strands, and his piercing green eyes hinted at a man likely in his 40s. Without offering Ethan so much as a glance, he absently flipped through the magazine in his hand. "Good morning, Great Elder," Ethan greeted respectfully. The man slowly lifted his head from the pages, his indifferent green gaze meeting Ethan's with a steady, appraising stare that lingered for a moment. "It's been a while, Asher. I wonder what brings you to the domain of this old man." The Great Elder, the librarian, remarked in a calm, measured voice. "I am simply here to read, Great Elder," Ethan replied evenly, his expression unreadable, neither a smile nor a frown to betray his thoughts. Obviously, the Great Elder responded with a hint of amusement. "Anyone who enters a library comes to read, after all. Then I suppose there's nothing left to keep you," he added smoothly, his gaze shifting briefly to Lyra, who stood silently behind Ethan, before returning to the magazine in his hands. There's something different about him," the Great Elder mused, observing Ethan from the corner of his eye. Unaware of the scrutiny, Ethan moved deliberately through the library's aisles. Even if he had sensed the gaze upon him, it would not have altered his purpose that brought him here today. "You may wait here or explore if you wish. I'll return in a few hours," Ethan said without turning. At his words, Lyra halted mid-step and nodded silently. She remained rooted in place, her eyes calm as they followed Ethan's every movement. Approaching a particular row of shelves, Ethan murmured to himself, I first begin with world history, then branch out to other subjects from there." He lifted his hand to retrieve an old, heavy book titled History of the World. Without concern for appearances or status, Ethan settled onto the floor, his back resting casually against the bookshelf. As he opened the book and began to read, his mind absorbed the knowledge with effortless clarity and ease. "Thank goodness my intelligence came with me." One can only wonder what sort of mind Asher possesses, Ethan mused silently as he read. It was precisely his intellect that allowed him to maintain a flawless 5.0 CGPA with apparent ease, all the while finding time to study and read medical textbooks to assist Jennifer with her own exams. From memory, Ethan had never seen Asher engrossed in a book. His years, from childhood at 5 to 16, had been consumed entirely by continuous physical training. 11 years of ceaseless exertion, enough for any observer to dismiss him as all muscle and no brain. Ethan effortlessly flipped through the thick book, its hundreds of pages seeming weightless in his hands. Within minutes, he had absorbed its contents. A faint frown crept across his face as he closed the book, his mind meticulously processing everything he had just read. The world into which he had transmigrated was called Crimora. At first glance, it appeared an ordinary realm, its inhabitants going about their daily lives untouched by supernatural forces or extraordinary powers, much like his previous world. But, unlike his former home, Crimora lacked technological advancement. Crimora was a world without nobles, kings, emperors, empires, kingdoms, or divisions. There were no gods to rule over it. Instead, it existed as a singular, unified entity, an apparent idol of harmony and order. Though crime persisted daily, offenders were swiftly apprehended and punished in accordance with the gravity of their offenses by the authorities entrusted with maintaining justice. Until everything changed. The first shift was recorded around 20,000 years ago, though some whispered it may have occurred even earlier, shrouded in the mists of time. A fragment of a star plummeted from the sky, striking Crimora's ground with a cataclysmic impact. Upon contact, a pulse of energy radiated outward in a perfect ring, encircling the entire planet. Witnesses to this extraordinary event rushed eagerly to the site of the star fragment's descent, driven by hope of treasure or revelation. Yet, all they found was a yawning sinkhole, carved deep into the earth by the force of the collision. But that was only the beginning. The pulse of energy, witnessed by many yet dismissed as an enigma beyond their understanding, especially since it appeared but once, had quietly set in motion a profound transformation. As years passed, subtle changes began to manifest, impossible to ignore. Some people found themselves sensing an unfamiliar presence in the air, an intangible shift. Others experienced the sudden awakening of abilities, emerging seemingly from nowhere, altering the very fabric of their existence. Crime surged as individuals began wielding their newfound abilities without restraint. Yet, with the rise of lawlessness, so too did justice rise to meet the challenge. The world grappled to comprehend the unfolding changes and the forces behind them, ultimately attributing the upheaval to the star fragment that had fallen from the sky. And in this, they were not mistaken. For the star fragment's influence extended far beyond merely awakening latent powers. It heralded something far greater, something yet to be fully understood. Humans were not the only beings touched by the star fragment's influence. The transformation rippled through the natural world, reaching animals and plants alike. Creatures awakened, their very biology reshaped, bodies grew larger, stronger, and swifter, claws lengthened, and fangs sharpened into deadly weapons. They became monsters in the truest sense. These beasts tore through cities with terrifying ease, extinguishing lives day after day. Even those newly gifted with mysterious abilities found themselves powerless against the relentless onslaught. Meanwhile, plants too underwent remarkable changes. They towered higher, their leaves a deeper, more vibrant green. Their presence exuded a soothing calm. Fruits grew sweeter, and crops flourished with unprecedented speed, bringing bountiful harvests to the hands of grateful farmers. But that was not all. In Crimora, it was widely believed that what truly defined life was the soul, the essence capable of generating emotions. Happiness, sorrow, anger, love, and hope. Though never proven by science, this conviction endured. The soul was thought to both produce and harbor these emotions, while the body served as their vessel, responding in harmony, for body and soul were inseparable. But the star fragment had wrought a deeper change. The pulse of energy it unleashed shattered the delicate balance within the soul. Emotions, anger, love, hatred, no longer remained confined to the soul. They spilled forth into reality, manifesting within Crimora itself. These living emotions were unlike any beasts or monsters before. They were more savage, more cunning, embodying a primal intelligence that made them all the more terrifying. Thus began a new level of devastation, an unending war. Death tolls soared into the millions. Lands lay in ruin, and civilizations teetered on the brink of extinction. Humanity faced the very edge of annihilation. Yet humans did what they did best. They fought back. They hunted down these living emotions, obliterated the monsters and beasts, refusing to surrender. Crimora burned fiercely, the planet itself seeming on the verge of collapse under the weight of chaos. But from destruction arose creation. From death blossomed life. Years passed in a vanishing blur. Crimora was rebuilt anew, civilization resurrected from the ashes. Individuals gifted with abilities and powers became commonplace. Walls were erected, divisions formed, empires rose, and emperors ascended to rule. Nobles emerged, claiming their place in the new world. Yet the war did not cease. The monsters born from normal animals endured, and the living emotions, those living manifestations of the soul, still roamed, haunting the land. In time, names were bestowed upon these phenomena. The emotions given life came to be known as the Emovira, while the energy harnessed by people for their abilities was called Astra, a tribute to its celestial origin. For mighty empires now spanned the world, each commanding its own territories and wielding distinct power. In a hierarchy of authority, the emperor reigned supreme, followed by the dukes, then the marquis, the counts, the viscounts, and finally, the barons. These four empires bore the names Zarathorn, Thalvern, Velkarin, and Vandross, ruling the west, north, south, and east respectively. I'm screwed, aren't I? Ethan thought, his mind reeling as he absorbed the weight of history. The star fragment, the evolution of all life, emotions given form, death, carnage, humanity teetering on the brink of annihilation. A wave of helplessness washed over him, and for a moment, Ethan felt the sting of tears. His former life had been so simple, so perfect, too perfect for the grim reality unfolding in these pages. Is the entity that reincarnated me punishing me for the ease of my past life? Ethan mused with a self-deprecating smile. A fleeting urge to pray washed over him, perhaps to fail his awakening and avoid stepping into this endless cycle of conflict. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had never come across a novel where one was reincarnated or transmigrated and escaped the battle that inevitably followed. Reluctant or not, the fight was always waiting, pulling them in regardless of their choice or thought. Better to possess power and choose inaction than to be powerless and idle, Ethan thought as he rose to his feet. Not that I intend to do nothing. This family I was born into won't permit it. I will gather every ounce of power I can and ascend to the pinnacle of this world, so I may live on my own terms. That's not a bad goal, is it? With resolve sharpening his steps, Ethan scanned the shelves for his next read. His gaze settled on a tome about the awakening he was to undergo in just a few days. After a brief pause, he picked it up and began leafing through its pages. No need to sit this time, as the volume was far smaller than the history book he had just finished. So, awakening essentially unlocks one's astra veins along with innate talents or abilities, Ethan thought as he carefully returned the book to its place. It appears this world does not rely on mana or mana cores as I've encountered in other stories. The awakening forcibly activates dormant veins within the body, aptly named astra veins, since they serve as reservoirs where astra is stored. I should learn more about the Wargrave family, Ethan thought as he wandered deeper into the library. He spent several minutes poring over any volume that mentioned the Wargrave ducal lineage. Unconsciously, a whistle escaped him, a sound born of genuine admiration. The Wargraves were renowned for their brutal approach to things. Fight first, think later. Wherever the Emovira lurked, they were never far behind. Be it a monster's lair or a battlefield soaked in blood, the Wargraves thrived on conflict, living and dying by the flames of battle. The Wargrave family was one of the prestigious bloodline families within the Zarathorn Empire. Upon awakening, Every individual bearing the Wargrave bloodline summons a weapon unique to their very soul, a soul weapon. Unlike ordinary arms, these weapons need not be carried constantly. After use, they seamlessly return to the wielder's spirit. Bound intrinsically to their owner's existence, these weapons cannot be stolen or sealed and are utterly indestructible. When a Wargrave falls in battle, their soul weapon perishes alongside them. The awakening of such a weapon signified exceptional innate talent with that particular form of combat. But that was not all. Beyond awakening a soul-bound weapon, each Wargrave also awakened a singular elemental affinity, an element intrinsically linked to their weapon. Lastly, there was their physique. While not as unique or extraordinary as their weapons or elemental powers, the Wargraves possessed naturally superior bodies. Their strength and speed surpassed nearly all within their ranks, complemented by staggering stamina and resilience that set them apart on the battlefield. So, this is why Asher never trained with any weapon. There's no way to know beforehand which weapon one would awaken. So everyone simply focuses on honing their physique first, only beginning weapon training after their awakening. Ethan, though, he had always found it odd that Asher had spent 11 years solely building muscle and endurance without ever touching a blade. No wonder that even after a year wasted drowning in alcohol, his body remains ridiculously fit. Truly a broken family. Ethan thought with a sigh. A weapon, an element, a physique. The Wargraves possessed it all. Ethan exhaled softly as he slid a thick book onto the shelf. His fate was clear now, unforgiving and absolute. Kill or be killed. In this world, in this family, there was no middle ground. Shaking his head with quiet resignation, he resumed his slow walk through the aisles, eyes drifting over the spines of countless books. Despite his keen intellect, he had never held much affection for books. He had no intention of returning to the library after today. After the awakening, people became capable of drawing astra from the air into their astra veins. It's essentially cultivation, Ethan mused, snapping another book shut with a hint of frustration. Yet, there are no cultivation manuals to be found. Everyone draws astra at their own pace, some faster, some more efficiently, but there's no standardized path, no structured techniques, no classifications like mage or healer either. Abilities manifest randomly during the awakening, he reflected, his footsteps echoing softly as he continued down the aisle. Everyone in this world is naturally fit. Astra passively enhances the body from birth, strength, speed, stamina, durability, all elevated by default. The Astra veins act as conduits, constantly reinforcing the body. It's as if everyone here is born a Superman. Ethan mused as he walked. Hours slipped by unnoticed, until Ethan finally came to a stop. His gaze settled on Lyra, standing a short distance away, her presence quiet but unmistakable. "It seems you didn't even bother trying to read anything. You just followed me," Ethan said, shaking his head with a sigh. "I've been alive a long time, young master," Lyra replied evenly, stepping forward until she stood precisely 2 paces behind him. "Long enough to have read more books than I care to count." "Right," Ethan mused as he resumed walking. "The stronger someone is, the longer they tend to live. Shame there's no path to immortality through cultivation. I might have considered it. Then again, I've heard that for immortals, boredom becomes their greatest enemy. Maybe eternal life isn't such a great bargain after all." His thoughts drifted from one subject to another, his mind a quiet storm of reflection. Ethan arrived at the same table where he had last seen the Great Elder seated. "You're finished reading?" the Great Elder asked, glancing up from his book. "I must say, this is your first visit to the library, and you spent 7 hours here. That might just be a new record." "Asher really is the all-brawn, no-brain type," Ethan mused privately. "Not that it's his fault, just look at the family he comes from." Offering a polite smile, Ethan replied, "I'll be awakening soon. I figured it would be wise to learn a bit of world history before then." The Great Elder gave a slow nod, then returned his attention to the book in his hands, a subtle signal that their conversation had concluded. Taking the hint, Ethan turned and walked out of the library, the weight of knowledge and answered questions trailing behind him. From what Ethan had gathered in his hours at the library, the Wargrave family operated under a rigid hierarchy of power. At the top stood the Primarch, the head of the family, his father. Below him were the elders, comprised of the Primarch's siblings, making them Ethan's uncles and aunts. Above them were the great elders, the biological uncles and aunts of both the Primarch and the elders, Ethan's granduncles and grandaunts. In the Wargrave family, only the Primarch was permitted to bear an heir. Any elder or great elder found with a child would face immediate execution alongside the child. Ethan could only regard this as cruel, yet he understood the reasoning behind it. The rule existed to prevent internal strife, ensuring that no elder or great elder would attempt to position their own offspring as a future Primarch. Power in the Wargrave household was not inherited through ambition, but dictated by blood and order. Even the women of the family were forbidden from marrying, whether within or outside the bloodline. If one was not the Primarch, one was not expected to have children, regardless of the circumstances. The Wargrave bloodline was meant to remain pure, unchallenged, and tightly controlled. The bloodline of the Wargrave stays and dies with the Wargrave. But what if the current Primarch were impotent? Ethan couldn't help but entertain the thought. Would they simply replace him? Would the entire system collapse under its own rigidity? He had come across records of some defiance. 3 members of the Wargrave family who had dared to secretly bear children. Their rebellion had been short-lived. Each one was discovered and executed, along with the child they tried to protect. No mercy, no second chances. What kind of family did I reincarnate into? Ethan wondered, his steps aimless as he wandered the halls. Guided by Asher's memories, Ethan made his way to the training grounds. As he arrived, the sharp ring of clashing metal greeted him, an unrelenting symphony of precision and power. Guards moved across the field in a blur, their speed far beyond what his eyes could follow. Seeing them was a generous term. He could only register afterimages, ghost-like flickers of motion that vanished as quickly as they appeared. The rhythm of their strikes, the cadence of steel meeting steel, was the only indication of their movements. Sparks flared beneath the sunlight, brief flashes of brilliance as their blades collided again and again. Despite his arrival, none of them paused. They remained entirely absorbed in their practice, dancing across the field like phantoms locked in a silent war. Ethan's eyes gleamed with quiet awe, shining like distant stars as he watched the display unfold before him. He had seen scenes like this countless times in movies and anime, but witnessing it live, in raw, unfiltered reality, was an entirely different experience. On the opposite side of the training ground, another guard balanced effortlessly on a single fingertip, the scorching sun beating down endlessly as beads of sweat traced slow paths down his chiseled form. For a full 30 minutes, Ethan remained rooted in place, utterly captivated. He didn't so much as blink, completely absorbed by the continuous dance of strength, skill, and discipline before him. After a while, the sparring guards came to a halt. Their eyes shifted toward Ethan, who stood frozen, a faint trail of drool at the corner of his lips. Startled, Ethan quickly wiped it away as their steady gazes pulled him back to reality. They approached in unison, bowing respectfully as they spoke in chorus. "Good afternoon, 10th Sunday." Ethan studied them silently for a moment before nodding in acknowledgement. "Good work," he replied curtly, then turned and walked away. While some of the maids had cast disdainful glances at Asher whenever he wasn't looking, the guards showed no such disrespect. Their loyalty ran deeper. Their very lives were intertwined with the family's honor and legacy. Ethan circled the building several times, deliberately avoiding the other sons and moons of the Wargrave family. He had no desire to encounter any of them before his awakening. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the grounds, Ethan finally returned to his room, done for the day. Lyra wasted no time. She arrived shortly after, carrying dinner. She hadn't brought lunch, knowing Ethan had spent the entire day either buried in books or wandering the estate. It was already 9 o'clock in the evening. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, eyes fixed on the window where the moon hung low, its pale light casting a gentle glow across the room. Though I've come to accept this new life, if I fall asleep tonight and never wake in my old world, then I will fully embrace Asher. From this moment on, I will become him, he thought quietly. With that resolve, Ethan finally lay back and pulled the feather-soft, white duvet over himself, surrendering to the soothing embrace of sleep. 4 days had passed since Ethan's transmigration into this new world. In that brief span of time, he had come to terms with his reality. He had embraced this world. No, his world. He had accepted this family as his own. He had accepted Asher, for he was now Asher. He had embraced it all. Yet, at his core, he remained unchanged. The world might have shifted around him, but it would not reshape who he truly was. Over the past few days, Asher had largely confined himself to his room, limiting his interactions with the outside world and only emerging when absolutely necessary. During that time, he had grown somewhat closer to Lyra. Yet, despite their increased familiarity, the dynamic between them remained unchanged, a clear line drawn between master and servant, nothing less and nothing more. Within those 4 days, whispers had already begun to circulate, rumors that Asher had finally emerged after an entire year of self-imposed isolation. A year spent locked away, refusing to face reality. A year spent running from the world. Now, talk spread not only of his return, but of his newfound presence in the library, and the subtle yet undeniable shift in his demeanor. And, of course, the ninth son, Thalric, did not let the opportunity slip by. Seizing the moment, he began spreading malicious rumors that Asher had been harassing the maids, and that his visits to the library were merely a ploy to browse martial arts techniques he intended to sell in preparation for his inevitable banishment. Lyra was not spared from the swirling rumors. Her name passed from mouth to mouth, entangled in Asher's fate. If punishment awaited him, she would not escape it. Bound to him by duty and oath, she was destined to follow him, through disgrace, through exile, until the moment of his awakening. To live beside him, to fall with him. Such was her path. A woman of formidable power, reduced to a shadow of status by the weight of her loyalty. Yet Asher and Lyra remained unfazed. Unmoved by the rumors, they carried on in silence. From dawn until dusk, Lyra stood guard outside Ethan's door by Asher's command. A precaution born not of paranoia, but of realism. Asher understood all too well. In most worlds, power dictated truth. In a place governed by survival of the fittest, the one with the biggest fist was always right. From the books he had read in the library, he knew the Wargraves were bound by strict codes. They were forbidden from killing or even striking one another, regardless of the depth of their hatred or personal grudges. Disputes were settled only through formal duels or an ancient family tradition known as death by duel, where combatants fought until only one remained standing. But the Wargraves' strict prohibition against physical violence outside of formal duels did not guarantee safety. It did not mean that no one would attempt to strike or assassinate him in secret. After all, there is a first time for everything in this life, much like the unprecedented childbirth by a non-primarch. Asher understood that even if he reported an assassination attempt, without concrete evidence identifying the culprit, no justice would be served, no matter how certain he was of their guilt. Call it paranoia if you will, but it was far wiser to have Lyra standing guard outside his door, day in and day out. Asher lay beneath a crimson duvet, his chest rising and falling in a gentle, steady rhythm as he drifted in deep sleep. Sunlight filtered through the window, its warmth tempered by the drawn curtains, casting soft shadows across the room. Minutes later, his violet eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the quiet morning light. He sat up slowly, lingering for a moment as his thoughts clung to the fading remnants of a dream. Jennifer. She had appeared again, vivid and loving, in the fragile landscape of his mind. He couldn't simply erase her from his heart, despite having accepted this world, this new reality. Jennifer was his first love, his first everything. Though he was whole as a man, it was she who made him feel truly complete. He couldn't casually cast her aside just because of his transmigration. Yet, deep down, he knew that, sooner or later, he would have to let go, whether he was ready or not. Sometimes, he found himself wishing that Jennifer had transmigrated alongside him into this world. Yet, just as often, he chastised himself for such selfish thoughts. Unlike him, an orphan, isolated even among the children of the orphanage, Jennifer had a family. A real family. Parents, siblings, cousins, grandparents. He could never wish the burden of transmigration upon her, knowing how it would shatter the bonds that held them together. After all, what family wouldn't swell with pride to have a medical doctor among their ranks? To sever such a bond would be nothing short of selfish. With a heavy sigh, he rose from his bed and approached the curtain. Drawing it aside, he let the golden rays of the sun spill across his flawless face, welcoming the new day. Some things never change, Asher murmured, recalling how, in his past life as Ethan, opening the curtain had always been the very first act upon waking. And here, in this new world, that habit remained unchanged. His gaze drifted to the clock on the wall, noting the time before he turned and made his way toward the bathroom. As he prepared for his bath, his mind raced ahead to the day's impending event, the awakening. The day of the awakening had finally arrived, and with it, Asher's 17th birthday. Yet no one had come to wish him a happy birthday. Not that he expected it, for he barely knew anyone here. He felt no nervousness about the awakening itself. As a transmigrator, he was certain it would come to pass. What unsettled him was the thought of meeting the other members of his family. During a Wargrave's awakening, all family members, the pre-march, the great elders, the sons, and the moons were required to be present. It was a solemn occasion, marking the addition of a new member to their ranks. For Asher's first awakening, attendance had been mandatory, and the entire family had gathered. By the second, fewer had come, as their presence was no longer obligatory. Now, on the eve of his third awakening, Asher was almost certain that very few, if any, would appear. Yet, despite the slim chance, his heart quickened at the mere thought of encountering the elders, or even the pre-march. Nothing will go wrong. I will turn this hell mode world into my easy mode, just like my past life. Ethan spoke to himself, continuing his bath with steady and calm pace. After a few moments, Asher emerged from the bathroom, a towel draped casually around his waist. "You may come in, Lyra," he said, loosening the towel as he stood before the mirror clad only in his underwear, quietly admiring his stature. Though he had never committed to a rigorous training regimen, he had grown accustomed to this body, incorporating modest exercises, a handful of push-ups, some squats, and light calisthenics. Not that his physique demanded it, but he resolved to maintain some semblance of discipline through these simple movements. Lyra entered with quiet composure, the door closing softly behind her. She approached Asher and handed him the attire designated for the day. Since this was the day of his awakening, and his final opportunity at it, he was expected to present himself impeccably, allowing for nothing less. Accepting the garments, Asher dressed with effortless grace. Tailored black trousers, an ash-colored shirt intricately embroidered with subtle patterns in various hues, and polished black shoes completing the ensemble. Asher had insisted to Lyra that he did not wish to appear ostentatious. Yet even in his understated attire, he carried an undeniable air of distinction. Simply the face and physique of a born charmer, he mused with a subtle smile. "Happy 17th birthday, young master," Lyra said softly, the faintest hint of a smile touching her lips. She then lifted her hand, conjuring a small, square box that materialized effortlessly. Gently, she handed it to Asher. A space ring, Asher thought, his eyes briefly flickering to the ring adorning Lyra's index finger. "Who? You've never given me a gift before, Lyra. What makes this birthday any different from the previous 16?" he asked as he accepted the small box and carefully opened it. Inside lay a wristwatch. Having come from a technologically advanced world, Asher had witnessed timepieces of every imaginable design and caliber. Though the watches of this world could not rival those marvels, this one possessed a unique charm all its own. "Thank you, Lyra. I truly appreciate this," he said with a warm smile, fastening the watch onto his wrist without hesitation. Lyra observed silently as Asher fastened the wristwatch with swift ease. "I'm glad it pleases you, young master," she said quietly. Asher nodded, a playful grin tugging at his lips. "You know, with our impending banishment, it's best to save every penny we can." Lyra offered no laughter, her voice steady and resolute. "I'm certain this time you will awaken and prove everyone wrong." Asher shook his head with quiet conviction. "I have nothing to prove to anyone, Lyra." With that, he strode toward the chair where he took his breakfast each morning. "Breakfast will be served shortly, young master," Lyra said calmly before stepping out of the room. 4 days of boredom. No phones, no games, no internet. What do people my age do for amusement? Touch grass, perhaps. Ethan mused silently as he ate the meal Lyra had brought him moments before. Within minutes, he had finished. Rising from his seat, Asher approached the door, but paused just before it. Drawing in a deep breath, he exhaled with measured calm. Today, he was to confront the outside world for the very first time. After a brief moment of quiet resolve, he opened the door and stepped beyond its threshold. Lyra waited just outside, observing his emergence. "Shall we proceed, Lyra?" Asher said, already turning toward the chamber where the awakening would take place. In the Wargrave family, every detail necessary for the awakening was meticulously prepared a day in advance. Spotting a maid along the way, Asher gestured for her to clear his room, noting the plates still left behind. After a short walk, he arrived before a massive black door. 2 guards stood vigilantly at its sides, their weapons resting casually at their waists. Upon seeing Asher, they bowed in unison and greeted, "Good morning, 10th Sunday." Asher paused briefly, returning their salute with a nod. "We wish the 10th Sun success," they intoned simultaneously as the door glided open of its own accord, inviting him inside with a subtle motion. Without hesitation, Asher stepped through, Lyra following closely behind. He walked with a calm, measured gait, his heart maintaining a steady, composed rhythm as he entered the hall. The chamber was vast, dominated at its center by a 1-meter-tall pedestal, above which hovered a white, crystal-like orb suspended mere centimeters from the surface. Asher's eyes swept across the hall, absorbing his surroundings. Rising tiers of seats encircled the chamber like a coliseum, and scattered among them were figures, each bearing a distinct hair and eye color, yet all sharing an unmistakable aura of menace. Their physiques and attire spoke unequivocally of death. These were the witnesses to Asher's final awakening. The Wargrave family bore no singular trait in hair or eye color. It was their awakening alone that set them apart, rendering each uniquely formidable. 2 great elders, 3 suns, 1 moon. Asher counted silently as his footsteps came to a halt. It appears the Primarch and his wife are absent. His thoughts lingered with a quiet curiosity. Lyra had already retreated to a distant corner, standing silently in observance. This was Asher's moment, meant to be witnessed from the sidelines. The fate of both their lives would be determined here, in this very instant. A heavy silence stretched across the hall, thick and unbroken. No one spoke, all eyes fixed on Asher, as if silently urging him to make the first move. Among the spectators, Thaurik sat with a sardonic smile curling his lips. He had arrived fully convinced of Asher's inevitable failure and subsequent banishment. After all, if Asher had faltered twice before, why should the third attempt be any different? Then, abruptly, the silence was broken. The door behind Asher swung open, revealing a man clad in a pristine butler's uniform, white, immaculate gloves. He stood tall, 6'2", with striking black hair and piercing black eyes. Zarek, the Primarch's personal butler and trusted right-hand man. Zarek entered the hall with measured calm, a subtle smile playing on his lips. Though merely a butler by title, he was reputed to wield the greatest influence within the Wargrave family, second only to the Primarch himself. Within the rigid hierarchy, the great elders stood next in authority, followed by the elders. Yet Zarek had shattered this order. He held no formal rank or title, but his role as the Primarch's personal butler and trusted right hand afforded him unparalleled power. Like Lyra, Zarek had been assigned to the Primarch for birth. He had stood by the Primarch's side from the very beginning, saving his life on many occasions during his youth. Though only a butler by title, none dared to underestimate or confront him. Fear of the Primarch's wrath was enough to keep all in check. Of course, Asher learned much of this from Lyra. During those 4 days of confinement, he did far more than eat and sleep and exercise. He pressed Lyra for every scrap of knowledge she could offer, determined to understand the intricate web surrounding his family. "Forgive my lateness, 10th Sunday. I hadn't anticipated the matter I was attending to would take longer than expected," Zarek said smoothly, a composed smile lingering on his lips. "No problem, Zarek. A short delay is hardly an issue," Asher replied evenly. Zarek inclined his head and approached the pedestal. "You are already familiar with the process, 10th Sunday. There's no need for me to reiterate it, unless you wish me to." Asher shook his head firmly. "No need. Let's begin. Just like every cliché story, all I have to do is place my hand on this floating crystal orb," Asher mused. His hand rose deliberately, moving toward the orb. It hovered above the smooth surface for a few tense seconds as he drew in a deep breath, then exhaled steadily. In the next moment, his palm made contact with the orb. Every pair of eyes in the hall sharpened, fixed intently on him, anticipation hanging thick in the air as they waited to witness what would unfold. Seconds stretched on, yet the orb remained inert, its surface cold and lifeless. A wave of disbelief rippled through the assembly. Could a Wargrave truly fail to awaken? The silence was thick with unspoken doubts and murmurs. Thauric's smile deepened into a knowing smirk, his confidence vindicated. He had anticipated this very outcome. With a quiet mental sigh, Zarek prepared to announce the outcome, but before the words could leave his lips, the orb suddenly flared to life. Its glow intensified rapidly, bathing the room in a radiant light as Astra surged outward in powerful waves. Asher felt an unfamiliar energy surge into his body, heat radiating from within as a golden aura flickered briefly around him. It was as if his very blood vessels were igniting. Yet he understood this was no pain, but the awakening of his Astra veins. A few seconds passed as the radiant glow of the orb gradually faded, eventually returning to its dormant, lifeless state. A smile slowly spread across Asher's lips. Though he had been confident he would awaken, the brief moment of silence, the orb's initial failure to respond, had shaken him deeply. After all, who would willingly abandon the comfort of such a powerful family to start anew with nothing? "Congratulations, 10th Sunday, welcome to the path of the strong," Zarek intoned calmly, a warm smile softening his features. "Thank you, Zarek," Asher replied, returning the smile. Without another word, Zarek turned and strode away. Whispers rippled through the hall as murmurs of relief spread among the elders and great elders. It wasn't personal concern for Asher. They cared little for him individually, but a complete failure by a Wargrave to awaken would have been a blight on their family's honor. At least that stain had been averted. Among those present was the librarian Asher had encountered 4 days prior. The sun and moon remained as stoic and unreadable as ever. Without a word or glance in Asher's direction, they rose and strode toward the door, their personal maids silently following in their wake. Yet one sun lingered, seated with a faint, knowing smile fixed on Asher. Thauric's smug expression dissolved into a deep frown, disbelief etched across his features. Though stunned, he refrained from causing a scene. Quietly, he stood and exited the hall. Neither the great elders, the elders, nor the suns and moon cared to inquire about the weapon or element Asher had awakened. After all, one who had failed his awakening twice. How far could such a one truly rise on the path of power? And their assumptions were not without merit. Those who awaken only on their third attempt often find themselves destined to falter early, striking insurmountable barriers that confine them forever to mediocrity. Lyra, standing quietly to the side, watched with a subtle smile as her young master successfully awakened. Yet she remained silent, her gaze shifting as a figure approached, Zarek. The moment he drew near, her smile vanished, replaced by a composed greeting. "Good morning, Zarek. You already know why I'm here," Zarek said calmly. "Now that the 10th son has awakened, will you continue to serve him personally, or will you return to the circle?" Following the awakening of their charge, a maid or butler faced a choice: to continue serving their designated son or moon indefinitely, or to return to the ranks of the household staff. Zarek had chosen the former, as had most maids and butlers before him. Yet choosing to remain was only half the battle. Whether the sun or moon accepted their continued service was an entirely different matter. "I choose to serve the 10th son until death," Lyra replied with calm resolve. Zarek nodded approvingly and handed her a document. "Sign this, and have him sign it as well. Return it to me no later than tomorrow." Without another word, Zarek turned and exited. Lyra slipped the document into her space ring and gave a small nod in acknowledgement. Asher stood firm, a faint smile playing on his lips. The moment he awakened, a subtle ding echoed in his mind, a clear sign of his system activating. He didn't need an explanation. Instinctively, he knew what it meant. Eager to explore this new interface and to confirm the weapon he had awakened, though he was already certain of his element, feeling its power coursing within him, he prepared to delve into it. The absence of anyone lingering to inquire about his weapon or element barely registered. Before he could engage with the system, footsteps echoed from ahead. Asher lifted his gaze to see who approached. It was the first son, Malric Wargrave. Asher watched with quiet intensity as Malric Wargrave, the first son, advanced with unhurried, deliberate strides. A perpetual smile played on his lips, but it did little to soften the weight of his presence. His eyes shimmered an icy blue, matching the hue of his hair, and his broad shoulders carried an air of effortless authority. Unconsciously, Asher swallowed hard. Though newly awakened, he could already feel the overwhelming pressure that radiated from Malric, a presence so immense it seemed to bend the very air around him. The smile, calm and confident, only served to make him appear all the more formidable. Despite standing at an impressive 6 feet 1 inch, Asher felt insignificant in comparison. Before Malric's towering 8-foot frame, he seemed no greater than a child standing before Titan. I wonder what the first son of this family is truly like. Is he mad or merely misunderstood? Asher thought, carefully maintaining a neutral expression. From what he could recall, the original Asher had never actually spoken with Malric. In fact, their only encounter had been a fleeting moment when Malric observed him in silence from a window during training, their eyes meeting just once. Malric came to a halt before Asher, then slowly lowered himself to Asher's eye level, placing a firm yet gentle hand atop his head. "Congratulations on your awakening, youngest," he said, a rare smile gracing his lips, his eyes reflecting genuine warmth. Asher remained motionless, momentarily stunned by the unexpected gesture. He had anticipated intimidation, not praise, from a man known for his fearsome reputation. After a brief pause, he composed himself, forcing a polite smile. "Thank you, first son," he replied carefully. He had never met Malric before, and it felt wiser to use the man's title rather than his name. "There's no need for such formality," Malric said calmly, his smile graceful. "I'm your elder brother, your eldest sibling. Call me Malric. We shouldn't speak to each other like strangers." Asher gave a small nod in response, though inwardly, disbelief churned within him. The first son, this man feared and revered in equal measure, was being cordial, almost normal. It didn't sit right. Part of him screamed that it was all an elaborate act. Perhaps the first son enjoys these kinds of games, Asher thought warily. Playing with people twisting their thoughts. He had read about such characters too many times in the pages of novels, those who wore kindness like a mask. And in a world as brutal as this one, kindness was often the most dangerous lie of all. "So, what brings you here, Maverick?" Asher asked, adapting with surprising ease to the first son's request for familiarity. "Oh, nothing much," Maverick replied casually, his tone light. "I simply came to witness your awakening." As the two began to walk side by side, leaving the awakening hall behind, a quiet rhythm settled between them. Behind them, at a respectful distance of 10 steps, followed Lyra and Malric's personal butler, silent shadows granting the brothers space for their conversation. From the fragments of memory now accessible to him, Asher realized that Malric had been present at all of his previous awakenings. Over the past 4 days, Lyra had shared bits of insight, enough to paint a broader picture of the man walking beside him. The first son was considered an enigma by nearly everyone. He smiled at all, treated everyone with the same disarming charm, making it nearly impossible to gauge his true thoughts, except for his enemies. To most, that ever-present smile had long ceased to be comforting. Many believed it to be a mask, something carefully crafted to conceal a far more dangerous reality beneath. "Then what if I hadn't awakened?" Asher asked quietly as they passed a cluster of maids along the corridor. The smile on Malric's face remained steady, unfazed. "I always knew you would awaken. After all, you're a wargrave. But if you hadn't—" He paused thoughtfully before continuing, "I plan to take you under my wing." Asher's steps faltered. Malric's openness made it easier to speak than he expected. "Why?" he asked, his voice genuine and unguarded. "Why? Because why wouldn't I care for my sibling?" Malric replied simply, reaching out to pat Asher's head once more. Asher gently removed the hand and smoothed his hair back into place. They resumed walking, though a contemplative silence settled between them. After a few minutes, they arrived at Asher's door and paused, standing side by side before it. "You're not curious about the weapon and element I awakened?" Asher asked calmly. Though indifferent toward most Wargrave family members, he wasn't so callous as to disregard genuine care when it was shown to him. He was no maniac, after all. Malric's expression remained composed. "I am curious," he admitted quietly, "but I'd rather not see it just yet. I want to witness it when you've mastered control, when you can wield it in battle. Perhaps then we can spar." Asher found himself at a loss for words. The idea of Malric wanting to spar with someone freshly awakened bordered on madness. Yet he did not protest. This was typical of the Wargrave bloodline, passionate, battle-hardened, and relentless. He simply nodded in quiet acceptance. Perhaps this is who he truly is, Asher reflected, and not the monster so many believe him to be, but in truth, he understood very little. Then Malric raised his hand, and a rectangular wooden talisman materialized in his palm, seemingly summoned from the ring on his finger. He extended it toward Asher and spoke with quiet calmness. "If you ever need my aid, infuse this with your Astra, and I will be there without delay." Asher took the talisman, studying its intricate craftsmanship with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. After a moment, he looked up and asked, "You're leaving?" Malric gave a slow nod. "We Wargraves don't waste time idling. Train hard, or you'll perish from some unknown threat, youngest." With that, he turned and walked away in calm, measured strides. Asher watched Malric and his butler retreat down the corridor, then allowed himself his first genuine smile. "Thank you, big brother," he said softly. Malric's footsteps came to a sudden halt. His head turned slightly, a subtle smile touching his lips as he replied, "Anytime, youngest." The moment the words left his mouth, he vanished, no longer bothering to walk. Can he teleport? Or is his speed simply that extraordinary? Asher wondered, stepping into his room, his mind already racing with possibilities, superhuman strength, lightning-fast speed, and the countless powers that might lie ahead. Upon entering his room, Asher sank onto the edge of his bed, immediately lost in thought. Lyra, sensing his introspection, remained silent, standing quietly by his side. After a few moments, Asher lifted his gaze and looked toward her. "You may leave." I need to review the changes that occurred after the awakening. Without a word, Lyra stepped forward, and the file Zarek had entrusted to her materialized in her palm. She handed it to Asher, who began to scan its contents with an unreadable expression. At the bottom left of the document, his eyes caught Lyra's signature. Are you certain you wish to remain my permanent maid? Asher asked quietly after finishing the file. Once he signed this document, he alone would have authority over Lyra. Even the Primarch himself would be powerless to command her, or at least that's why the Wargrave law says. Yes, young master, Lyra replied with a respectful bow. Most maids would have abandoned Asher the moment he awakened. After all, they assumed he wouldn't progress far, having awakened only on his last attempt. Such a failure would inevitably affect their own lives, diminish cultivation resources, reduce pay, and a drop in status. It was, by all accounts, a poor bargain. Yet Lyra chose to remain by his side, fully aware of the risks she faced in losing all those privileges. Asher was well aware of the implications, though he didn't understand why Lyra chose to remain. He decided not to ask. Instead, he simply nodded, approached the table before him, and took up a pen. With a steady hand, he signed the document and handed the file back to her. You may leave. Don't stand by the door this time. Return to your quarters. Without hesitation, Lyra accepted the file and departed. She understood that Asher wished to immerse himself immediately in the details of his awakening. After all, it was the natural course for anyone in his position. A faint smile graced her lips as she made her way back to the maid's quarters. Now alone, Asher could no longer contain his excitement. With a surge of joy, he mentally shouted, "System!" Ding! Acknowledging host. System assimilating. 2%, 30%, 50%, 70%, 80%, 100%. System interface booting. Name, Asher Wargrave. Age, 17. Bloodline, the Wargrave lineage. Titles, youngest heir, 10th son, disgrace of the Wargrave. Life rank, faint star. Sub-life rank, dust. Affinity, lightning. Strength, 1326. Agility, 1326. Vitality, 1428. Perception, 918. Note, normal human stat cap before awakening, 10. Wargrave stat cap before awakening, 15. System inventory, empty. Asher's eyes gleamed with fascination as he absorbed every detail displayed on the system panel. His gaze lingered on the life rank, the equivalent of cultivation levels in this world. From what I've read, the life ranks progress as follows: Faint Star, Kindle Star, Bright Star, Blaze Star, Swift Star, Firm Star, Wave Star, Void Star, Soul Star, Crown Star. 10 ranks in total, he thought. He then shifted his attention to the sub-rank beneath it, which the progression was Dust, Spark, Flare, Pulse, Radiant for all life ranks. Asher's eyes settled on his affinity. From the very moment of his awakening, he had sensed a newfound connection to the element, an intimate bond that had been absent just 4 days prior. He realized that with but a single thought, he could command it at will. Raising his right hand, lightning effortlessly danced and crackled around his fingertips, responding seamlessly to his command. He could feel the surge of Astra energy within him, fueling the elemental display. Instinctively, he understood that once his Astra was depleted, his control over the lightning would vanish. Nonetheless, a smile blossomed across his face. This was nothing short of an impossible feat in his past life. But here, he could command the very forces of nature with effortless ease. The thought of future battles made his smile widen, anticipation bubbling beneath his calm exterior. Then, suddenly his thoughts faltered. Wait, what am I thinking, he thought. Is the Wargrave bloodline turning me into a battle-crazed fanatic like the rest? Yet despite the unease, he couldn't deny the surge of joy that came from wielding such supernatural power firsthand. With renewed focus, Asher's eyes returned to the system interface, his gaze sweeping over his attributes. Every single stat had literally doubled. He could feel his body pulsating with newfound energy, stronger, sharper, faster than ever before. The man he was yesterday was incomparable to the one he had become today. Such was the undeniable miracle of awakening. His eyes then settled on his perception stat, noticeably lower than the rest. Yet Asher understood why. The original Asher had never honed his senses, focusing solely on physical training. That explained why his other attributes soared while perception lagged behind. Asher felt the Astra energy coursing through every fiber of his being, invigorating and strengthening each part of his body. He could sense the Astra veins winding within him, much like the network of blood vessels that sustained life. The greater the flow of Astra energy, the higher one's life rank, Asher reflected. His eyes shifted to the notification beneath the attributes. Truly a family of monsters, Asher mused as he read the message. The Wargraves had clearly surpassed even humanity's natural limits, at least before the awakening. He had read of their extraordinary physical prowess in the library, but the reality was staggering. A full 50% increase in physical stat alone was almost unfathomable. But Asher knew this was merely the baseline. Countless skills and techniques existed to amplify people's power. If the original Asher hadn't wasted an entire year drowning himself in alcohol, his physique might have reached its absolute peak, he thought bitterly. Then his eyes caught the final line on the system panel, and a smile crept across his face. At least my system has an inventory. Now all I need is a space ring to conceal it, Asher mused. He reached for the rectangular wooden talisman the first son had given him earlier. With a mere thought, the talisman vanished from his palm, only to reappear instantaneously moments later. Asher nodded in quiet satisfaction, pleased with the seamless test. With a thought, the system interface vanished. Time to find out what weapon I've awakened, Asher thought, an unshakable feeling stirring deep within his soul, as if the weapon itself were calling out to him. Just as he prepared to answer the silent call, the system interface abruptly reappeared, as if displeased at having been ignored. Asher came to an abrupt halt as the system interface materialized once again before him. His eyes scanned the notification, and for a moment he stood motionless, caught off guard by its contents. He hadn't anticipated this development, but in hindsight, it wasn't entirely surprising. After all, the system had offered little in the way of tangible benefits, serving primarily as a display for his stats and granting access to an unlimited inventory. A smile tugged at his lips as a surge of excitement rushed through his veins. Who didn't know about newbie gifts? In countless novels, they were essentially overpowered starter packs, tools that gave protagonists an early edge. System, do you even need to ask? Open it immediately. Asher's thoughts brimmed with anticipation, his expectations soaring to unimaginable heights. Affirmative, host. Opening newbie package. Congratulations, host. You have received absolute physique. Asher read each notification carefully, eyes scanning every word with sharp focus. He had no intention of skipping anything. This was his cheat, his golden ticket. System, display the details of the absolute physique. I might not know what it is exactly, but anything with absolute in the name has to be broken tier, right? He thought, a grin spreading across his face, anticipation gleaming in his eyes. Ding! The details of the absolute physique cannot be displayed until the host completes assimilation. The system's chime echoed in his mind. Asher's expression shifted into a frown as he read the message. His mind immediately leapt to the countless tropes he'd seen before. Assimilation usually meant agony. It was almost a given. Searing pain, bones reshaping, muscles tearing and reforming, and of course the inevitable black goo oozing from his body as impurities were purged. The mental image alone made him frown more. With that thought lingering in his mind, Asher made his way to the bathroom. He stripped off his clothes, leaving only his boxers, and lowered himself into a lotus position on the cool tiled floor. The atmosphere was still heavy with anticipation. Grabbing a piece of cloth, he bit down hard, steeling himself for the torment he was certain would follow. His eyes, however, burned with unshakable resolve, no amount of pain would deter him. System, begin assimilation of the physique now. Affirmative, host. The moment the system responded, a surge of energy exploded within Asher's body. It was unlike anything he had ever felt, pure, unfiltered power rushing through every fiber of his being. His veins bulged, muscles tensed, bones groaned under unseen pressure. Ligaments stretched and tightened. His brain pulsed like a beating drum, and even his eyes burned as if being reforged from the inside out. It was as though his entire existence was being rewritten, every cell, every thread of his being restructured with brutal precision. Deep within him, his astra veins suddenly expanded, then contracted violently, condensing and refining themselves. Even the small trace of astra he possessed from awakening began to swell, becoming denser, more potent. To Asher's surprise, a sense of serenity washed over him. The world around him seemed to shift, brighter, clearer, almost surreal. The dull whites of the bathroom tiles now shimmered with an almost ethereal clarity, and the air itself felt lighter. His mind sharpened, every thought crisp and focused. Even his heartbeat pulsed with a quiet joy, as though his very soul was celebrating the transformation. And yet, the agony he had steeled himself for never came. Instead, he felt an overwhelming comfort, as if wrapped in the embrace of something ancient and powerful. His body continued to rebuild itself from the inside out, each adjustment smooth, seamless, perfect. Then, just as swiftly as it began, the energy faded, the brilliance receded, and Asher found himself once again grounded in the present. The bathroom was just a bathroom, but he was no longer the same. Asher sat in a quiet daze, savoring the lingering echoes of the transcendent state, as if clinging to the final notes of a melody before they faded into silence. "Is this what enlightenment feels like in those cultivation novels?" he murmured, voice barely above a whisper, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Slowly, he rose to his feet. If he had felt energized after his awakening, now he was overflowing with energy, every fiber of his being humming with quiet power. He could feel it in his breath, in his heartbeat, in the very way he moved. A quick glance in the mirror confirmed what he already sensed. His height had increased, rising from 6 feet 1 inch to a towering 6 feet 3 inches. His skin, already flawless, now radiated an unnatural perfection, smooth, radiant, and unmarred, as though sculpted by divinity itself. "I feel like I could destroy a mountain with a single punch," Asher muttered, eyes locked onto his reflection in the mirror. His body remained lean, no exaggerated bulk, but beneath that streamlined frame, he could sense the sheer, compressed strength coiled within his muscles like a drawn bowstring. Every movement felt lighter, more precise, yet brimming with latent power. Of course, he wasn't naive. He knew it was just the illusion that came with a sudden surge in strength. No, he couldn't shatter mountains, not yet. Still, the temptation to test himself gnawed at him. He cleared his throat, and even his voice carried a subtle change, deeper, more resonant, like tempered steel. "Status," he commanded, his tone thick and steady. The system's interface flickered to life before Asher's eyes, displaying his updated profile in glowing texts. Name: Asher Wargrave. Age: 17. Bloodline: the Wargrave lineage. Physique: absolute physique. Titles: youngest heir, 10th son, disgrace of the Wargrave. Unique body holder, new. Life rank: faint star. Sub-life rank: spark. Affinity: lightning. Strength: 2652. Agility: 2652. Vitality: 2856. Perception: 1850. Asher carefully scanned every detail once more. The system had updated his profile, adding the absolute physique and a brand new title to his list. His gaze lingered on the sub-life rank spark. A slow, triumphant smile blossomed across his lips. He had only awakened some minutes ago, yet now, he had already broken through a minor realm. He could feel the increased flow of Astra pulsing vividly through his veins, surging with newfound intensity. Too bad Astra can't be measured numerically like the other stats, Asher thought silently. But this limitation did little to dampen his enthusiasm. His eyes eagerly scanned each attribute once again, a growing smile spreading across his face as he confirmed what he already suspected. Every stat had instantly doubled once more, just as they had during his awakening. At this rate, won't I be a god by tomorrow morning? Asher said with a grin, his confidence soaring. Then his eyes landed on his perception stat, an astounding leap from 18 to 50. The jump was far greater than he had initially realized. Suddenly, a new awareness dawned on him. He could perceive everything happening within a 5-meter radius around him with crystal clarity. In his earlier excitement, he hadn't even noticed this remarkable change. He could now see with perfect clarity behind him, beside him, his vision encompassing everything within a 5-meter radius, as if no blind spots existed. The world around him appeared sharper, purer, as though an entirely new dimension had unfolded before his eyes. Then, an idea struck him. Slowly, he closed his eyes to test it, and to his astonishment, his heightened perception remained unbroken, his awareness persisting with flawless clarity despite the darkness. System, if you keep spoiling me like this, I might just marry you tomorrow. Asher joked, laughter bubbling from his lips. Who didn't love being spoiled? Now, show me the details of the absolute physique, he added with a wide grin, anticipation shining in his eyes. Affirmative host. Absolute physique. Description. A gift from the system to the host. Abilities. 1. Perfect muscle memory. Once the host performs a physical action, his body memorizes and refines it instantly. 2. Optimal movement efficiency. No wasted movement. Every step, breath, or swing is subconsciously calculated for the best result. 3. Limitless physical growth. The host body evolves with experience, automatically optimizing itself through combat or training. Gains strength, agility, and reaction time rapidly. 4. Instinctive adaptation. Host body reacts before his brain processes danger, almost like a predictive instinct. 5. Battle intuition. The host doesn't just move perfectly, he understands enemy movement patterns at a subconscious level, improving rapidly with each fight. 6. Omniperception. A passive sensory ability that grants the host absolute 360-degree awareness of his surroundings. Asher meticulously examined each ability bestowed by the physique, a wave of disbelief washing over him. He swallowed hard, his mind spiraling into a whirlwind of contemplation. Isn't this absolute physique a bit too overpowered? He wondered, his gaze fixed unwaveringly on the system panel before him. Earlier, he had joked about ascending to godhood by morning, but now, that notion felt far less absurd. Perfect muscle memory granted him the extraordinary ability to master his weapon form after merely 1 or 2 swings. Any martial technique he executed even once would be instantly ingrained, an almost absurd advantage. But that was not all. With perfect muscle memory, he could effortlessly wield any weapon he picked up, surpassing even those who had dedicated years to mastering it. Not to mention its battlefield applications. His reaction time would soar to unparalleled heights. Even when pushed to the brink of exhaustion, his attacks would flow with flawless precision. Asher found himself at a loss for words. Every ability granted by the absolute physique seamlessly complemented the others. With battle intuition sharpening his instincts, he was poised to become an unstoppable force on the battlefield. Though Asher lagged 3 years behind his peers in every other respect, the absolute physique had effectively erased the disparity between them. While he remained at a lower life rank, his stats had already reached an impressively high threshold. He could feel the overwhelming surge of Astra coursing through his veins, an amount no one at his level should possess. Once again, the absolute physique had bridged that divide with remarkable ease. His peers held higher life ranks in name alone. In terms of physique and Astra, he was already on par with them. However, when it came to control, he remained lacking, Having just awakened, his mastery over Astra and elemental manipulation was virtually non-existent. But with the power of his absolute physique, that gap could be erased in the blink of an eye. Two individuals sharing the same life rank did not necessarily possess equal quantities of Astra. Ultimately, it all depended on the strength and capacity of their Astra veins. In this world, there were even those who awakened rare abilities capable of harnessing 10 times the Astra typically available to others of their rank. Asher shook his head. Now wasn't the time to dwell on comparisons. Besides, he hadn't truly had any peers of his own. The Wargrave strictly forbade any of their heirs from leaving the household until they awakened, which meant Asher had spent all 17 years of his life confined within these walls. Time to find out about the weapon, Asher said with a faint smile, anticipation stirring within him. Would fate grant him yet another overpowered gift? Was he truly favored by Lady Luck? But first, he chose to dress, realizing there was no trace of the ominous black goo he had imagined. Perhaps he had simply overthought it. With that, he made his way back to his room. Sitting softly on the edge of his bed, he steadied his breath and quieted his mind, focusing once more on the faint, silent call he had felt earlier. Within seconds, something responded. In a sudden flash of white light, a faint weight settled into Asher's hand. His gaze dropped instantly, drawn to the object that had materialized before him. The weapon was long and gleamed with a refined silver sheen. Its slender frame spoke of elegance, and its tapered, razor-sharp tip made its purpose unmistakable. It was designed to pierce, to thrust with precision and grace. A rapier, but this was no ordinary rapier. Its edges was unlike any Asher had ever seen, lined with jagged, serrated edges that ran along its length like a row of razor-sharp teeth. These tooth-like notches weren't meant for clean slashes. They were designed to tear, to rend through flesh and armor alike with brutal efficiency. It was a weapon forged not only for precision, but for devastation. Asher's eyes gleamed as he studied the rapier in his grasp. It trembled faintly in his hand, almost as if it were alive, responding to his touch, resonating with something deep within him. His fingers glided along its sleek silver surface, and with every second, the connection between them grew stronger, inexplicably familiar. A smile tugged at his lips, widening the longer he gazed at the weapon. As if attuned to his emotions, the rapier began to hum with greater intensity, its subtle vibrations echoing the silent bond forming between wielder and blade. Asher addressed the system. System, can you provide me with the details on the rapier? Ding. Please note, host, the system does not disclose information on things unrelated to itself. However, since both the system and the rapier are linked to your soul, compliance is granted. The system responded immediately, though with a reluctant tone, as if burdened by the extra effort. Wait, you reside within my soul? I assumed you'd be in my mind, like other systems. Negative, host. However, the system's presence within the host's soul offers certain benefits. Asher sat frozen in disbelief at the thought of the system still have gifts to offer. Why didn't you inform me sooner? The host did not inquire. Asher arched an eyebrow, intrigued by the system's response. Is there anything else I should be aware of? I'm asking now. Negative, host. Very well. Then show me these benefits you speak of. Affirmative, host. Affirmative, host. The system chimed in, and the text across the panel shifted smoothly. System benefits granted to the host. 1. Mind Shield. The host is rendered completely immune to all forms of mental interference, including but not limited to mind reading, mind control, memory manipulation, illusions, empathic intrusions, and other psychic abilities. 2. Soul Guard. The host's soul is fully protected by the system, rendering all forms of soul-based attacks and manipulations ineffective. Asher gazed at the system interface with a subtle smile. With this protection, he was no longer a walking open book. In this world, individuals capable of reading minds did exist, though they rarely spoke of such abilities. After all, mental intrusion was a hidden trump card, guarded in silence. Still, such individuals were exceptionally rare. How does one even defend against soul attacks in this world? Are there truly individuals born with soul-related abilities? Asher pondered, a faint crease forming on his brow. He shook his head, brushing the thought aside. There was no point in dwelling on such things that didn't affect him. System, provide the details of the rapier, Asher thought, his eyes drifting down to the weapon still resting in his grasp. Affirmative, host. Name. Description. A soul-bound weapon, awakened through the host's longing affinity for the sword. Unlike conventional rapiers, typically designed for speed and precision thrusts, this blade defies standard limitations. It exists beyond the boundaries of form and expectation, a manifestation of the host's will and essence. Abilities. 1. Position marker. The rapier allows the host to teleport instantly to any of 3 marked locations. No cooldown. Unlimited range. Requires no Astra. Immune to spatial interference. 2. Astra Veil. The rapier passively stores up to 30% of the host's total Astra reserves, preserving energy for any moments. 3. Crimson Pact. The blade passively absorbs the blood of defeated enemies, using it to regenerate the host's injuries without conscious activation. Asher's smile deepened as he read through the system's notification. He examined each ability granted by the rapier, his expression glowing with quiet satisfaction. And why wouldn't he smile? Even the first ability alone was already overpowered. He could teleport to any location marked by his rapier, no Astra required, no concern for distance. In moments of danger, this would be his ultimate escape route. Though limited to 3 marks, Asher felt no disappointment. He was content, not greedy. The best part? Even spatial restrictions meant nothing. He could bypass them entirely. Simply too overpowered, Asher mused, a spark of excitement flickering in his eyes. The second ability, Astra Veil, was another game-changer. The rapier could passively store up to 30% of his total Astra reserves, effectively acting as a reservoir for emergencies. Asher could sense the Astra stored within the blade. It was intimately connected to him. With a single thought, he knew the stored energy could be transferred instantly into his body. However, he couldn't draw on it now. His Astra veins were already brimming, overflowing with Astra. What made this ability even more remarkable was its passive regeneration. The moment any amount of Astra, be it a mere 1%, was used, the rapier would immediately begin replenishing that exact portion without delay. Then, there was the final ability, Crimson Pact, a passive effect that allowed the rapier to heal his injuries by absorbing the blood of his enemies. However, Asher quickly realized this ability wasn't as straightforward as it first appeared. The effectiveness of the healing was tied to the quality and potency of the blood consumed. After all, one couldn't expect to regenerate a severed arm using the blood of mere rats. The stronger the opponent, the more potent their life essence, and the greater the healing that followed. Besides, this was Asher's favorite ability out of the 3. He didn't know how often he might be injured in the future, but one thing was certain. He had no intention of placing his survival in anyone else's hands. In this world, Crymora, there were no healing potions, no universal remedies, no so-called healing mages. Instead, healing was a rare, innate ability. People were born with it, not taught. And even then, its effectiveness depended entirely on how well one honed it, what techniques or skills they could forge from their own unique potential and abilities. Asher nodded in satisfaction, a quiet confidence settling over him. His rapier's abilities truly covered every essential aspect. Teleportation for swift movement or a timely escape. Astra Veil, a vital reserve of energy in a world powered by Astra. And healing, an indispensable skill in a realm where death could strike without warning. In Crymora, such an ability wasn't just advantageous, it was necessary for survival. As if responding to his satisfaction, the sword hummed softly in his grasp, as though whispering, "I know, I'm just that good." Asher's gaze lingered on the rapier, feeling the deepening bond between them. It was a known truth amongst wargraves. Every weapon awakened after their awakening always possessed at least one ability. There was no exception. I should give you a name, Asher murmured, sensing that simply calling it rapier or sword no longer did justice to the weapon's significance. He paused, lost in thought, searching for the perfect name. Virilis. He finally spoke, the word rolling off his tongue with utter calmness. From this moment on, you shall be known as Virilis. Asher spoke with a heavy tone. The rapier hummed again, and Asher felt the bond between them deepen. Suddenly, the blade slipped from his grasp and began to float effortlessly at his side. Asher watched silently, a calm acceptance settling over him as the rapier hovered there, steady and ready. System, what is happening? Asher inquired, but the system remained silent, offering no response. Of course, the system had already made it clear it would not address matters unrelated to itself, he reminded himself. It seems our bond has grown stronger, granting the rapier the ability to float on its own, Asher mused. Could it acquire even more abilities in the future? But Asher wasn't sure about that, since it would make the already overpowered Wargrave bloodline even more broken at this point. Still, Asher couldn't help but consider the advantages of a weapon capable of independent movement. In the event of an assassination attempt while the wielder slept, the sword could act as a silent guardian, defending its master without hesitation. And it needn't be limited to assassination. Any sudden sneak attack could be met with swift, autonomous defense. As Asher was done checking out his weapon and its new ability, he decided to let Virilis just continue floating beside him. Since I've settled everything on the system, my affinity and weapon, I should try Cultivation next, Asher thought as he adjusted his sitting position. His legs crossed over each other with his forearm on his knees as he sat in a lotus position. Cultivation in this world is basically sensing the Astra in the air and drawing it into the Astra veins through the skin pores. Asher's thoughts churned as he went over things on Cultivation he had read in the library. Taking a deep breath, Asher closed his eyes and allowed his senses to expand. He could already passively sense Astra in the air, but this time he was actively doing it. Asher instantly controlled the asters, drawing them to his skin pores. His absolute physique instantly seemed to come alive as Astra flowed into his body with frightening speed. Asher could feel Astra flowing through his skin pores and directly flowing into his Astra veins. The spinal vein was the first to receive the Astra. Then the spinal vein redistributed the Astra to various veins: heart, brain, limbs, liver, kidneys, lungs, eyes, solar plexus, and palms. Asher felt surreal and calm as each vein received Astra, each vein having a network of micro-veins throughout the body, further enhancing the body and increasing the amount of Astra that flows into the Astra veins. To break through in life ranks, one has to expand the Astra veins' capacity and strengthen the walls of their Astra veins. In return, the Astra veins strengthen the entire body system while also increasing the capacity to hold more Astra. Hours went by as Asher sat down without moving. Only the rhythm of his breathing process could be heard in the room as Astra flowed through him. Suddenly, Asher felt his internal structure start to subtly adjust as his Astra veins seemed to contract and strengthen, then expanded gently and slowly. A few minutes later, Asher opened his eyes. He could see Virilis floating beside him without returning to his soul. I have broken through. Isn't this a bit too fast? Asher thought as he felt his body had changed. System, is this a result of my absolute physique? Asher asked the system. Affirmative, host. Asher smiled. He liked this unnamed benefit the physique brought, but he wasn't delusional to think him increasing his life rank would be this easy. He knew it was simply because he was still at the bottom stages of a life rank. Status, Asher thought. Name, Asher Wargrave. Age, 17. Bloodline, the Wargrave lineage. Physique, absolute physique. Titles, youngest heir, 10th son, disgrace of the Wargrave. Unique body holder. Life rank, faint star. Sublife rank, flare. Affinity, lightning. Strength, 52-57. Agility, 52-57. Vitality, 56-58. Perception, 50-52. Asher smiled as he went over his system panel. Seeing his progress made him want to train more. If I stay in an Astra-rich environment, my cultivation speed should be faster, Asher thought. It seems this time my stats didn't double. If it did, I might have been afraid at the speed I'm gaining strength, Asher thought. He saw there were differences in increment between each stat. Perception and vitality increased by 2, but strength and agility increased by 5. Understandable, Asher thought. If vitality was that easy to increase, didn't it mean he would simply live for thousands of years? Besides, other people's stats might not increase by so much when they break through. Mine would increase by this much due to my physique. Asher nodded in thought, as it made more sense. With that, Asher's gaze shifted to the window beside him. It was already dark as the moonlight filtered into his room. Damn, it's already dark, Asher murmured as his gaze turned to the clock hanging on the wall. It's already 10 p.m. Let's sleep then, Asher thought, and with that, he slipped under his duvet. Virilis vanished as it returned to his soul. The morning sun rose as its rays of light were cast into Asher's room as he slept. A knock on the door woke Asher from his sleep. He rubbed his eyes groggily. He didn't need to think who it was. He knew it was Lyra. Come in, Asher spoke as he came down from his bed. At his words, the door opened and Lyra walked in. She saw Asher standing on the side, seemingly ready to start the day. She raised an eyebrow in surprise as she saw him. Then she smiled and greeted, "Good morning, young master." Asher's gaze turned to her as he noticed the smile. "You seem happy this morning. What's the occasion?" he asked. "I'm just glad you awakened, young master," Lyra simply replied as her smile was already gone. Asher didn't reply. He simply went to the bathroom and went through his daily routine. Lyra handed him the clothes for the day as she spoke. "Young master, you will be meeting the pre-march today. It's better to look your best," Lyra spoke. Asher paused, surprised at what he had just heard. "When was this decided, Lyra? And why wasn't I informed earlier?" Asher spoke. "I was informed by Mr. Zarek yesterday afternoon when I went to submit the file, young master. But I wasn't able to inform you as you didn't want to be disturbed for the day," Lyra replied calmly. Then it clicked with him. He had told Lyra he didn't want to be disturbed throughout yesterday, which was why she didn't even bring him lunch or dinner. But on the other hand, it didn't matter if he was informed or not. What could he possibly prepare for in a meeting with the pre-march? "When will I be meeting Father?" Asher asked as he quickly dressed. "Mr. Zarek would be here by 10 a.m., so I'm guessing the meeting is by that time," Lyra spoke. Asher's gaze turned to the clock once again. "I still have some time left," Asher thought. "Quickly bring my meal. I need to be done with everything before Zarek arrives," Asher replied. Lyra nodded, then stepped out. The moment the door closed behind her, Asher felt her presence instantly vanish. Is she running instead of walking? Asher thought. In less than a minute, Lyra had returned with breakfast. Asher ate quickly. The moment it hit 10 o'clock on the clock wall, a knock echoed through the room. Asher turned to Lyra and nodded. Receiving the command, Lyra opened the door. "Good morning, Mr. Zarek," Lyra greeted with an expressionless face. "Morning, Lyra," Zarek replied, his gaze turning to Asher, who was wiping his mouth with a napkin. As his gaze landed on Asher, a soft smile appeared on his lips. Then he spoke, "Are you ready, 10th son?" "I am, Zarek," Asher replied calmly as he rose from his seat. "I never thought I would be meeting him this early," Asher thought as he stepped out of his room, following closely behind Zarek with Lyra following behind him. They met no maids on the way as they made their way through some hallways. Asher's thoughts spiraled as he walked gently, but his steps remained steady and composed. Asher noticed, as he walked, his feet no longer made any sound as they met the floor beneath him. But he wasn't the only one who had noticed this. Zarek and Lyra noticed, but none said anything. Damn, this absolute physique is insane. Perfect muscle memory and optimal movement efficiency have simply accomplished such a feat just by walking. Even if I become nervous when meeting the pre-march, my body might not react externally. This could give me the best poker face in existence. Combined with my mind shield ability from the system, can anyone even know or guess what I am thinking at any time? Asher thought. As Asher was lost in thought, They arrived before a huge black door with just a few designs in black on the door. There were no guards, besides. Who could possibly guard the pre-march? 10th son, the pre-march is within. You can go in, Zarek spoke with a gentle bow. He and Lyra wouldn't be accompanying him inside. Asher nodded, then took a step past Zarek. The huge black door instantly opened to his presence. Asher's eyes darted across the room. Shelves stood against the wall as books fitted into each of them. 2 couches could be seen at the sides, then at the front, a table with various documents on it. A man stood with a book in his hands, his hair golden, matching the color of his eyes, his shoulders broad, standing at a staggering 8 feet 2 inches in height. His presence was serene and calm. If Asher's eyes weren't on the man before him, he wouldn't notice him, as the man seemed one with his surroundings. Without waiting a single second, Asher bowed slightly, his hand rising and resting on the left side of his chest as he greeted, "I greet the pre-march." His voice was calm, just loud enough to reach the man before him. "Congratulations on your awakening." The man finally spoke, his gaze never leaving the book in his hand. "Thank you, pre-march," Asher replied as he lifted himself from his bowing position. "And congratulations on your consecutive breakthroughs." It seems the history of those awakening on the third, try becoming mediocre, doesn't affect the Wargrave bloodline. The pre-march spoke, the book in his hand closing with a soft thud, his golden-colored eyes turning to Asher. Asher's heartbeat quickened as the pre-march congratulated him on his breakthrough. "It is what is expected of me, pre-march," Asher replied, his hands clasped behind his back as he stood straight. So that's why Lyra and Zarek were smiling. They had noticed. Would have been weird if the pre-march hadn't noticed, Asher thought. "Do you know why you are here?" The pre-march continued. "I'm guessing it's for my training," Asher replied calmly. "Indeed it is. As a Wargrave, we don't waste time on anything. Your training will be starting today. As you had failed your awakening consecutively, you shouldn't be qualified to train with the firsts, but I will reinstate this as a gift for your breakthrough." The pre-march spoke, his eyes on Asher, as if reading him like the book he held before. "Thank you, pre-march," Asher replied. "Let me see your weapon and element," the pre-march ordered. Asher instantly raised his hand, and lightning coursed through it. At his side, Virilis appeared, floating gently beside him. Lightning and a rapier. A unique kind of rapier also. The pre-march spoke as he gazed at Virilis. "To think you've achieved this level of connection with your weapon in just a day," the pre-march continued. Asher didn't reply. He simply stood there without a word. "You have 30 minutes to prepare. Zarek will be taking you to the training ground. I hope you perform well during the true awakening. You may leave now." The pre-march spoke in finality. Asher bowed once more, then turned on his heels and stepped out of the room, the huge black door closing behind him. He saw Lyra waiting for him. Zarek was already gone. "How was the meeting, young master?" Lyra asked as she followed behind Asher. "Good. I will be heading to the first training ground. The pre-march has reinstated me," Asher replied as he walked towards his room. "Congratulations, young master," Lyra replied. Asher didn't reply. He simply kept walking. He hadn't expected the pre-march to call him just to talk about his training. But at least he was rewarded with a better training ground for his breakthrough. He didn't ask about Virilis's ability, Asher thought. "Size. I said thank you more times than I can count," Asher thought, as most of his replies to the pre-march were just "thank you, pre-march." "The first training ground, huh?" Asher thought. As a ducal noble family, the Wargrave recruited children to train before and after their awakening. Those who awaken on their first try are sent to the first training ground. Those who awaken on their second try are sent to the second training ground. And those who awaken on their third try are sent to the third awakening ground. As for those who fail to awaken, they would simply be asked to leave the Wargrave estate. Per the rules, Asher was meant to be sent to the third training ground, but the pre-march has sent him to the first. History has shown that those who awaken on their first try always tend to be better than those who awaken on their second try, hence the Wargrave division of training grounds. In the case of someone who awakened on their second try, being able to match people who awakened on their first, they will be transferred to the first training ground. Asher stood silently in his room, removing his clothes with deliberate motions. A flurry of thoughts raced through his mind. Uncertainty gripped him, and he had no idea what to expect or what might come next. From the fragmented memories he possessed, the original Asher had never once stepped foot on the training grounds. They were reserved solely for those who had recently awakened, serving as a place of preparation and training until the age of 18. Upon reaching the age of 18, every trainee was expected to confront real combat, undertaking missions assigned by the Wargrave family. Though Asher was only 17, he doubted he would remain in the first training ground for the entirety of the year, especially in light of the true awakening the Pre-March had spoken of. The true awakening was a sacred rite of the Wargrave family, a ritual that stood apart from the conventional awakening. While the standard awakening involved the use of an orb to activate one's astral veins, the Wargrave family's tradition was far more brutal and unforgiving. 6 months after the initial awakening of their astral veins, the family's suns and moons were cast into a wild, untamed forest with no guidance or aid. From that point on, survival became the only teacher. They either returned having seen the world for what it truly was, cruel, vast, and indifferent, or perished, swallowed whole by its merciless depths. From the tender age of 15, the moment their astral veins first stirred, the Wargrave family exposed their direct descendants to the raw, unfiltered horrors of the world. It was their way of forging strength through suffering, of shaping heirs through hardship. But Asher's awakening had come late, at 17. His own trial, the true awakening, would begin in 6 months. Ordinary children recruited into the Wargrave household were spared this merciless tradition. As they were not of the Primarch's direct bloodline, they were exempt from the ritual. Their training ended at 18, whereupon they could begin crafting their own horrors on their own terms. Truthfully, Asher had no idea what to expect from the so-called true awakening. The suns and moons who returned from it never spoke of their experiences. Silence was the only testament they gave. Still, he could imagine the nature of it: battles drenched in blood, survival against monsters twisted and evolved through Astra. Whatever else the ritual entailed remained shrouded in mystery. For now, all he could do was wait. 6 more months until the unknown became his reality. A knock echoed through the room, pulling Asher from the depths of his thoughts and snapping him back to the present. "Come in," he said flatly. As expected, it was Lyra. She stepped inside with quiet familiarity, holding a neatly folded set of clothing in her hands. This time, it was his training uniform, a form-fitting, pitch-black ensemble consisting of a long-sleeve compression shirt and matching trousers. "Your training clothes, young master," Lyra said softly as she handed the uniform to Asher. He gave a silent nod, accepting the garments before slipping into them without a word. Asher shifted and moved, testing the feel of the outfit. After a few motions, he gave a subtle nod of approval. The fabric clung to him like a second skin, offering no resistance to his movements. It was less a uniform and more an extension of his body. Asher exhaled deeply and seated himself on the edge of his bed, awaiting Zarek, who was tasked with escorting him to the training grounds. At that very moment, Virilis returned to his soul. Minutes later, another knock echoed through the room. This time, Asher did not issue a command for the visitor to enter. Instead, he rose, approached the door, and opened it himself. His gaze settled on Zarek, who stood tall, poised and composed as always. "Are you ready, 10th son?" Zarek asked, his eyes fixed intently on Asher. "I am," Asher replied with a nod. "Then let us proceed," Zarek said, pivoting gracefully on his heel. Asher followed close behind, unfamiliar with the path to the first training ground. A few steps behind them, Lyra moved in silence, trailing their footsteps. Zarek led them out of the building and into an entirely different sector of the compound. As they moved, Asher passed several guards, each bearing weapons at their sides. He spared them brief glances but did not slow his stride. Before long, they arrived at a vast structure, its architecture divided clearly into 3 distinct sections. Zarek offered no explanation and remained silent, his pace unbroken. Still, Asher could surmise that these divisions marked the 3 training grounds. Passing through a set of doors, Zarek and Asher entered the first training ground. By this point, Lyra had quietly slipped away. Only trainees were permitted within the grounds. Still, she remained nearby, concealed but within reach, ready to intervene at a moment's notice. After crossing another threshold, they stepped into a brightly lit room. At its center stood a modest table, behind which a man sat with composed posture. 2 empty chairs faced him, clearly prepared for his guest. Hearing the door open without so much as a knock, the man spoke without lifting his gaze from the photograph before him. "Who is it?" "It's been a while, Boris," Zarek replied, his eyes settling on the man seated across the room. Recognizing the voice, Boris immediately looked up, his expression. "I'm here to register the 10th son in the first training ground," Zarek said without preamble, striking directly at the heart of the matter. Boris's gaze flickered to Asher for the briefest moment, though his composed smile did not falter. "Mr. Zarek," he began, his tone polite yet firm, "I'm sure you're well aware of the rules. I have no authority to enroll the 10th son in the first training ground. Doing so would be a direct violation of family law, one that would quite literally cost me my head." Zarek shook his head slowly. "I'm not here to impose my authority. That would be no different from madness," he said calmly. "This is a direct order from the Primarch, granted as a reward for his current life rank, despite having awakened only a day ago." As he spoke, a folded parchment scroll materialized in his hand. Without hesitation, he extended it toward Boris. Boris accepted the scroll without a word. From the moment Asher had entered the room, he had sensed the young man's life rank. He had been surprised. Of course, according to the reports, Asher had only awakened the day before. But Boris had chosen not to reveal his astonishment. Only one person in Wargrave's recorded history had achieved anything remotely similar: the current Primarch, who had reached his first breakthrough the day after his awakening. Even so, that feat paled in comparison to what stood before him now. With careful hands, Boris unfolded the scroll and read through its contents. His eyes paused at the end, where the unmistakable seal of the Primarch had been stamped, a mark of unquestionable authority. "I need to find a way to control my presence. I can't have people reading me like an open book," Asher thought, his gaze distant but focused. He had no intention of concealing his power or capabilities, but the idea of being so easily deciphered was something he found deeply unsettling. Turning to Zarek, he broke the silence. "Zarek, does controlling my presence have anything to do with my mastery over Astra?" Zarek turned to Asher, clearly surprised by the question. A faint smile curved his lips as he replied, "It seems the 10th son has grown tired of being so easily read." He gave a slight shake of his head, a quiet note of amusement in his expression, before continuing. "People being able to perceive your life rank has little to do with your control over Astra or the amount flowing through your veins. It's more about the aura you emit, the presence you unconsciously project. That's what others pick up on. As for sensing the actual quantity of Astra within someone, that's a far rarer ability, and only those with a particular gift or trained perception can manage such a feat." Asher gave a small nod. "Thank you, Zarek." Since it had nothing to do with Astra control, there was no reason to delay. Without another word, he closed his eyes, shifting his focus inward, seeking the subtle rhythm of his own aura. Zarek and Boris remained silent, watching intently as the young Wargrave sat still, eyes shut. A few seconds passed. Then Asher opened his eyes, and his presence was gone. His aura, once unmistakable in the room, had vanished without a trace, as if it had never existed. Zarek and Boris exchanged a glance, faint smiles forming on their faces. Concealing one's life rank was a skill taught early through basic training, nothing extraordinary in itself. But to grasp it instinctively, within seconds, and with only a single explanation, marked Asher not just as talented, but as a genius among geniuses. As Asher's gaze settled on Boris, the older man offered a warm smile and spoke. "Welcome to the first training ground, 10th Sunday. Reaching into a drawer beneath the table, Boris retrieved a form and handed it to him. "I'll be under your care," Asher replied calmly, accepting the form. Picking up a pen, he filled it out swiftly. The fields were simple, requesting only basic information. Just a formality. Zarek rose from his seat the moment Asher finished. "Since my part here is done, I'll be taking my leave," he said, his tone measured. Without waiting for a reply, he turned and made his way toward the door, disappearing through it moments later. Once the form was completed, Boris leaned back slightly and took a more formal tone. "Before anything else, allow me to brief you on the structure and expectations within the first training ground." He proceeded to outline the rules with practice precision, the strict time frames for each session, the types of training conducted daily, and the standards each trainee was expected to uphold. From endurance drills to combat simulations, every element was designed to temper both body and mind under constant pressure. Asher remained silent throughout, absorbing every word with calm focus. He committed the details to memory, understanding that discipline would be expected, not requested. After the explanation concluded, Boris rose from his seat and gestured for Asher to follow. He led him through a corridor that opened into an expansive courtyard, vast, sunlit, and humming with intensity. Before Asher stretched a field alive with movement. Over 100 trainees were jogging in formation, their strides heavy, their faces drawn tight with exertion. Chests rose and fell rapidly as they fought for breath. Some looked moments away from collapse. Others had already succumbed, lying sprawled on the training ground with sweat-soaked clothes and trembling limbs. The air was thick with heat, fatigue, and the unspoken will to endure. Up ahead, a man stood at the forefront of the training field, his voice thundering above the rhythmic pounding of feet. "Keep moving. Don't stop until your legs give out. Push beyond the limit." His tone was sharp, each word driving into the trainees like hammer blows. Sweat streamed down faces, muscles trembled with exhaustion, but none dared to defy his command. Then, mid-shout, the man's head suddenly turned. His sharp gaze locked onto Boris and Asher standing at the edge of the field. "Stop," he barked. "You have 5 minutes to recover." Without delay, he strode across the ground, heading towards edge of the field. Reaching them, he halted and bowed slightly. "Good morning, 10th son," he greeted respectfully. Asher, in his usual quiet manner, responded only with a brief nod of acknowledgement. Turning to Boris, the man straightened. "What can I do for you, head instructor?" "The 10th son is now assigned to the first training ground," Boris stated flatly. He could see the storm of questions flickering in the man's eyes, but he had no interest in indulging them. Without another word, he turned and walked away. "So he's the head instructor. He won't be directly training us, just overseeing everything to ensure results," Asher thought as he watched Boris's retreating figure. "My name is Harold, 10th son," the man beside him said, his tone composed yet firm. "I'll be your physical fitness instructor. My sessions run from 7 a.m. to noon." As he spoke, Harold guided Asher toward a clearing where other trainees sat, drenched in sweat and gasping for breath. "Looks like I'm already late on the first day," Asher thought, walking in step with Harold. Asher followed Harold with measured steps, his demeanor calm and composed. Upon reaching the gathered trainees, Harold gestured silently to a spot on the ground, indicating where Asher should sit. "The 10th son will now be joining the first training ground," Harold announced curtly before turning away. He had granted the trainees a brief respite, 5 minutes to catch their breath. Once that time passed, training would resume without delay. The trainees murmured among themselves. There was no need to introduce Asher. His reputation had long preceded him. The disgrace of the Duke's family was a well-known tale within the estate. Everyone present knew he shouldn't be here. By all rights, Asher belonged in the third training ground. Yet, not a single voice rose to question his presence. And why would they? No one was foolish enough to speak out. Asher might be a disgrace, his awakening delayed until the third attempt, but none of that changed the fact that he was a Sunday, a direct descendant of the Wargrave bloodline, the son of a duke. With a single word, He could make their lives far more difficult than they dared imagine. They cast fleeting glances at him from the corners of their eyes, breaths still labored, their gazes drawn to his flawless features. Some didn't bother to look at all, opting instead to sit cross-legged in a lotus position, using every second of the 5-minute reprieve to recover their strength. Asher remained silent. He knew none of them, and his gaze seemed distant, unfocused. But through his omniperception, he observed some of them without turning his head. They were uniformly dressed in form-fitting compressed black shirts and trousers, men and women alike, just like the one he wore. As the final moments of rest slipped away, Harold's voice rang out from the sidelines. "On your feet. Begin." Without hesitation, the trainees rose and resumed their drills, not a single complaint uttered. Feet pounded rhythmically against the ground as they jogged, the sound echoing across the training field. Their breathing had steadied, if only slightly, and even those who had previously collapsed were now pushing forward, their bodies moving, if only barely. Asher moved with quiet precision, his footsteps falling in a steady rhythm against the ground. His body automatically adjusted effortlessly into a more perfect form as he jogged. He kept pace at the front alongside the other trainees, matching their stride with mechanical ease. This wasn't a race, nor was he trying to outshine anyone. The lingering stares at his back were of no concern to him. He simply mirrored their movements, focused and composed. Don't just jog, control your breathing. Inhale and exhale at steady, measured intervals. Harold's voice called out once more, sharp and brisk. Without warning, he appeared beside a trainee, his gaze piercing. "Why are you gasping like you've been running since birth?" he snapped. "Hold your breath for a few seconds, then begin breathing again, slowly and with control. I've told you before, regulating your breath helps condition and strengthen the body." After several more grueling minutes, Harold finally gave the command to stop. Many of the trainees collapsed to the ground without hesitation, gasping for air as they struggled to steady their breathing. Asher came to a smooth halt. He wasn't panting, nor did a single bead of sweat grace his skin. The duration had been far too short to challenge him. Without pause, they moved into the next series of physical conditioning drills. Harold offered no further rest. He had already granted them 5 minutes, and that was more than enough in his eyes. Yet none voiced a complaint. What right did they have? They were no strangers to the first training ground. Every drill, every demand was familiar. These exercises weren't just for discipline. They were designed to strengthen the Astra veins, increasing their capacity to channel Astra while simultaneously developing the body to its limits. Everyone in this world is born with a naturally strong body. Then there's the passive benefit of the Astra veins. There's no such thing as a fragile fire mage who dies from a single strike. Asher thought as he moved through the drills, his motions controlled and efficient. But that didn't mean Asher had it easy. The physical conditioning was designed to push every trainee to their limits, and Harold made no exception. Noticing Asher's superior physique, he silently increased the intensity of his drills, pushing him harder than the rest. It didn't matter that Asher was a son. Harold had no intention of showing favoritism. Sweat began to roll down Asher's skin, his muscles burning and straining with each movement. His breathing instinctively adjusted, his body adapting under the pressure as he forced himself to keep going. Time wore on, and eventually, the sun reached its peak, marking the arrival of noon. The moment the session concluded, Harold vanished without a word, leaving behind only the fading echo of his demands. No one moved at first. The trainees remained where they were, seated together in silence, each one catching their breath and bracing themselves for the next round of training. Minutes slipped by in stillness, until, without a single command, everyone rose in unison and began walking toward a secondary door along the side of the field. Asher stood as well, wordless and composed, falling in a step behind them. They passed through the door, and another training field unfolded before Asher's eyes. At its center stood a towering structure built from an assortment of woods and reinforced planks. Rising sharply toward the sky, like a monument of discipline and pain. Boris had already briefed Asher on the nature of the first training ground. He knew the second phase of training focused on movement. The instructor appeared in a blurry frame of motion. Her sharp gaze swept across the assembled trainees, her presence commanding immediate attention. "Since we have a new face among us," she began, her voice calm but firm, "I'll go over the principles of movement training once more." Everyone knew who she meant. The unspoken consensus was clear. The new face was Asher. "The purpose of this movement training," she began, her voice loud and crisp, "is to stop you from swinging your weapons around like idiots. Countless people have died in battle not because they lack power, but because their movement was trash." Her eyes narrowed as she continued. "Too many rush into learning advanced techniques without building a proper foundation. Some don't bother learning at all." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over them like a silent warning. "When your hands and feet don't move in harmony, you're no better than a bird waiting to be slaughtered. I'm here to keep you from dying. I'll demonstrate once. Only once." Without another word, she turned and walked toward the towering structure. The instructor hadn't spared Asher so much as a greeting, nor was it expected. Once training began, even suns and moons were bound by the authority of their instructors. Rank and status held no weight within the boundaries of the training grounds. Discipline ruled, and formality had no place in the pursuit of strength. Harold's earlier acknowledgement of Asher had only occurred because he arrived alongside Boris. Had Asher come alone, Harold wouldn't have wasted a breath on pleasantries. He would have gone straight into the drills, as always. Upon reaching the structure, the instructor wasted no time. With a fluid motion, she leapt onto one of the poles, then began moving swiftly from one to the next, her strides precise and effortless, like a dancer gliding through choreography. Suddenly, a wooden arrow shot from within the structure. Without hesitation, her shoulder twisted, her body flowing in a seamless motion as she stepped onto the next pole, evading the projectile with elegant precision. More arrows rained down from the sides, but they posed no threat to her. She moved like a phantom, untethered by the chaos around her. To her, the poles were no different from solid ground, each step executed with uncanny ease. Suddenly, as her foot touched one of the poles, it wobbled beneath her, destabilizing as though attempting to break her rhythm. But she reacted instantly, springing off with practiced grace, landing lightly on the edge of another pole before leaping once more to the surface of the next. Arrows sliced through the air, each one missing her by mere inches, but never once touching her. Massive wooden logs and beams followed in swift succession, but none found their mark. Within seconds, she emerged at the far end of the structure, untouched, unbothered. She didn't turn back to them. She simply vanished, disappearing from sight without a sound. No words were needed. The trainees, understanding the message with perfect clarity, immediately began their own movement training. "This training focuses on movement and balance," Asher noted, his gaze fixed on a structure positioned off to the side as he began walking toward it. His mind effortlessly replayed every motion the instructor had performed, as though each step, twist, and leap had been ingrained in his mind. The battle intuition granted by the absolute physique, it's absurdly overpowered. He mused inwardly. Then, with a controlled motion, Asher leapt upward, landing firmly atop the first pole. He drew in a deep breath and slowly exhaled, steadying himself. Not long ago, he had been just an ordinary person, but all of that had changed, and he had come to terms with it. Whatever trials lay ahead, he would face them head-on. With that resolve, he stepped forward. His mind and body moved in perfect harmony, instinctively mirroring the instructor's earlier movements. Pole by pole, he advanced, each step more fluid than the last. His speed began to build, not from force, but from refinement, as his body adapted and adjusted with every motion. His breathing remained calm and rhythmic as he moved, steady, focused. But then, without warning, a wooden arrow shot out from the side. The moment shattered his composure. A flicker of panic surged through him. Rationally, he knew the arrow wouldn't harm him, not with his current physique. But fear wasn't always rational. In truth, he had never been shot at before. In his past life, he had been just an ordinary person, someone who had never even been in a fight, let alone faced an arrow flying at him. His mind swirled with instinct and memory, yet his body moved on its own, mirroring the motion he had seen from the instructor just moments before. His shoulder twisted fluidly, his body following in perfect synchrony. With a seamless step onto the next pole, he evaded the arrow effortlessly, as though he had done it 100 times before. A smile tugged at his lips. He couldn't deny it. He was enjoying this. The wind whipped against his skin, cool and alive, and every movement felt effortless. There was a liberating rhythm to it all. He had never felt so free. It was as if the world itself bent around his motion, responding to his intent. Such grace, such speed, these movements had no place in his former world. Even if they existed, no one there could perform them with this level of precision. More arrows flashed from the sides and above, but Asher remained unshaken. That first arrow had been a turning point. After dodging it, something within him had clicked. Now he simply moved. Each step flowed into the next, fluid and controlled, his balance perfect. He heard the wind split behind him, a sharp whistle that only meant one thing. Something was coming. Within seconds, a wooden beam entered his omni-perception range, 5 meters. Asher didn't hesitate. Without a moment's pause, he backflipped, his body arcing through the air with practiced grace. His purple eyes tracked the beam as it swept beneath him, the world slowing for just a breath. Then, as if the moment were made for him, he descended, landing lightly atop the moving beam. Using it as a foothold, he propelled himself forward, his movements swift and spectral. A grin spread across his face. He moved like a ghost, untouched, untraceable, and within moments, he was already at the far end of the structure. Asher came to a halt, his expression blank, but beneath the stillness, a quiet awe stirred. He was savoring the sensation, the fluidity of his movements, and the startling ease with which he had accomplished it all. That was fun, he murmured under his breath, a trace of wonder in his voice. He had never experienced anything like that. A sudden voice broke the moment. "Have you done this before?" came the calm, yet curious tone of the female instructor behind him. Asher turned, his purple eyes meeting hers. "I haven't," he replied simply. The instructor already knew the answer. No training facilities were ever allocated to the suns and moons before their awakening. Until then, they were left to strengthen their bodies alone, using whatever crude means they could find. No assistance, no resources, no guidance. And yet, the ease with which Asher had moved had compelled her to ask. It wasn't something someone who just awakened could, or should, be capable of. Not without prior experience. Not without training. There was a calm certainty in his movements, a fluid confidence that spoke of something deeper, something unnatural. But she could also tell that Asher had mirrored her own movement. "It seems the 10th son is indeed a genius," the instructor said with a faint smile, a hint of intrigue in her eyes. "It seems I am," Asher replied, the smile returning to his face. He had no intention of wearing a constant mask of indifference or acting distant, as if he were above everyone else. Accepting that he was Asher didn't mean he had to become someone he wasn't. He was still himself, and he would live, speak, and move in a way that reflected exactly that. Seeing a son smile is indeed strange, the instructor mused silently. Among the children of the pre-march, only the first son had ever been known to smile. The rest carried expressions that ranged from cold to utterly unreadable, never warmth, never lightness. "Let's raise the tempo and the difficulty, then," she said aloud, her voice calm, but laced with challenge. And in the next instant, she vanished. Asher gave a small nod and stepped forward once more, re-entering the structure without hesitation. Each attempt grew more intense. The difficulty scaled rapidly, forcing him to adapt in real time. Poles destabilized in quick succession, sometimes more than 2 at once, while a barrage of arrows threatened to knock him down. But Asher didn't falter. He didn't overthink, he simply moved. With every stride, his body responded with instinctual precision, turning into a blur of motion as the instructor continued to escalate the trial. Time slipped by unnoticed. When a movement training finally came to an end, Asher stood tall. Though he had danced through the chaos with uncanny grace, sweat clung to his skin, proof of the physical toll. At times, up to 10 poles had collapsed beneath him simultaneously, forcing him to land sideways or rebound midair. And yet, through it all, he hadn't fallen once. After completing the movement and balance training, Asher trailed behind the other trainees. Unfamiliar with the layout of the first training ground, he had no choice but to follow their lead throughout the day. They passed through several doors before arriving at a chamber. Though it opened up into a new space, it was noticeably smaller than the expansive areas designated for physical conditioning and movement training. Asher's gaze drifted upward and froze. A man stood effortlessly on the ceiling, upside down, a book resting casually in his hand. As if sensing the weight of Asher's stare, the man's eyes lifted from the pages and met his. How is he standing like that? Asher wondered, his thoughts swirling with various possibilities. The man snapped the book shut with a quiet thud, then stepped off the ceiling. He descended gracefully, landing as if gravity itself bent to his will. Without preamble, he began to speak. The purpose of this training is singular, to enhance your control over Astra. Nothing more. I will teach only the fundamentals. The rest you will discover on the journey that is your life. He paused briefly, letting his words settle, then continued. Now, as is customary, begin by attempting to form a small sphere with your Astra. Those of you who have already mastered this should focus your efforts on learning to walk on walls or any other surface using Astra alone. At his command, the trainees dispersed into groups. Some remained standing, concentrating intently as they channeled Astra above their palms, attempting to form a small, stable sphere. Others moved toward the walls, channeling Astra into their feet as they began to ascend, each step a test of balance and focus. The man turned to Asher, his gaze calm yet expectant. Since you're new, he said, begin with the Astra sphere. Asher gave a silent nod to the instructor, then raised his hand, focusing inward. He felt the Astra stir within him, flowing through his veins before surging just above his palm. Though invisible to the naked eye, Astra could be sensed, its presence tangible like pressure in the air. He focused, shaping it with intent. But it was unstable. Each time he managed to mold it into the semblance of a sphere, it unraveled the next moment, dissolving into nothing. Still, he could feel something shifting, subtle adjustments, his control refining in real time. With every failed attempt, he improved. Minute by minute, his control sharpened. And after 3 steady minutes, the energy above his palm solidified, delicate, precise. A perfect astrosphere floated in place, stable and balanced. The instructor's gaze shifted to Asher, his eyes narrowing slightly in appraisal. You've managed to form it, he said, voice calm but firm. Now do it again, faster this time. Repeat it until it becomes effortless, until you no longer have to think. With that, he turned his attention to the other trainees, offering no further words. Asher could feel their eyes on him, curious, perhaps envious. It was hard to ignore. In just 3 minutes, he had accomplished something many of them still struggled to master. The astrosphere above his palm dissipated into the air, fading without a sound. Without hesitation, Asher channeled Astra once more, guiding it through his veins and into his palm. This time, the sphere formed instantly, clean, stable. He raised his other hand, channeling the same invisible force through his body, and a second astrosphere materialized just as swiftly. Too easy, Asher thought, eyes fixed on the spheres floating above his hands. With a thought, he dispelled them both and repeated the process. Again and again. And with each cycle, his control sharpened. He began to notice the subtle inefficiencies, tiny traces of Astra leaking into the air during formation. Gradually, Instinctively, he refined his technique, minimizing the loss and maximizing precision. The process, once fragile and uncontrolled, was quickly becoming second nature. Asher's gaze shifted toward the trainees attempting to scale the walls. Some managed a few steps before slipping, landing awkwardly on the ground. Others couldn't even lift themselves off the floor, their feet trembling with effort as they tried, and failed to channel Asher properly. His eyes then moved to the instructor. Unlike the struggling students, the man stood effortlessly on the vertical surface, as if gravity had no claim on him. Asher's mind began to turn, analyzing every subtle movement. He watched closely the posture, the calm breath, the way the instructor channeled Asher down through his legs, concentrating it into his feet to maintain contact and balance. Sensing the weight of Asher's gaze, the instructor turned his head. His eyes landed on the two Astra spheres hovering steadily above Asher's palms, stable, refined, and flawlessly formed. There was no flicker of surprise in the instructor's expression. Forming an Astra ball was, after all, the most fundamental of fundamentals. Geniuses often required an hour or two to perfect it. True prodigies, monsters, needed only minutes. He had trained suns and moons before, individuals of extraordinary talent, and they, too, had achieved this feat in mere minutes. Asher had simply done it faster. That alone wasn't enough to surprise him. Not yet. You may begin climbing the wall, the instructor said, his tone composed and unhurried. Asher responded with a simple nod, stepping forward with steady, confident strides. Astra surged through him, flowing to the soles of his feet. He adjusted it with careful precision, replicating the method he had observed from the instructor moments earlier. Then, without hesitation, he placed one foot against the wall. His body lifted effortlessly as his second foot followed, locking smoothly into place. For a brief moment, Asher stood still, completely vertical, his body aligned with the wall as though gravity itself had shifted to accommodate him. A small smile curved his lips. Then he began to walk, step after step, smooth and unbroken, as if he were strolling across flat ground. He moved past several trainees who wobbled, slipped, or clung tightly for balance, each struggling to maintain their footing where he now moved with ease. All eyes turned to Asher, stunned into silence as he strode past the instructor himself, still walking upright along the wall with perfect balance, as if defying gravity was as natural as breathing. Ow! The question echoed through every trainee's mind like a thunderclap. None of them could comprehend it. Walking on walls was supposed to be difficult, an advanced feat requiring both instruction and intense focus. The instructor hadn't even explained the technique to Asher, yet here he was, moving with casual ease, untouched by hesitation or strain. What unsettled them even more was the speed. Forming the Astra ball had taken him 3 minutes, an already remarkable feat, but this? He had accomplished it in seconds. No misstep, no falter, just effortless mastery. What the others didn't realize was that the reason Asher had taken 3 minutes to form the Astra ball was simply because he had done it without guidance. He had figured it out on his own. Had he seen someone perform it just once, he would have replicated it instantly. That was the kind of talent he possessed. His ease in climbing the wall was no different. He had observed the instructor's subtle control over Astra, how it was concentrated, directed, balanced. That single glance had been more than enough. But Asher wasn't the only one blessed with exceptional talent. Above, 3 trainees stood upside down on the ceiling, arms folded across their chests, silently observing the scene below. There was no struggle in their stance, no effort in their posture, only quiet composure and superiority. Asher had noticed them from the very beginning during the physical fitness training, where their physiques were clearly above average. During the movement and balance drills, they had moved with precision, struck by fewer arrows than anyone else. Now, even in Astra control, they maintained that same quiet dominance. Hours passed as the other trainees continued their relentless efforts, honing their control with unwavering focus. As the session neared its end and the group prepared to disperse, Asher dropped down from the ceiling, his body descending in freefall before twisting midair and landing with flawless precision on his feet. Weren't those who awakened on the third try supposed to be hopeless? The instructor mused, silently watching Asher blend in with the departing crowd. You can stop sneaking around now, the instructor said calmly, his gaze never shifting. In response, two figures emerged beside him, Harold and the female instructor. What are you doing here? Asked Virek, the Astra Control instructor, turning toward the pair with a raised brow. I came to see how the 10th son would fare, Eloan replied, her tone light. He breezed through my movement training like it was child's play. Yeah, Harold added, folding his arms. And now he's waltzing through Astra training the same way. We're heading to the next training ground, Eloan said with a small, teasing smile. You coming, or are you going to stay behind and keep reading your erotic novels? Virek sighed. Fine, let's go. I'm curious myself. With that, the trio vanished from sight. Asher walked calmly behind the rest of the trainees, his thoughts drifting. 2 more sessions, and I'll be done for the day. Technically, it's only 1 because I won't be allowed to join the second until next month. The 2 upcoming trainings were weapons practice and monster subjugation. The Wargrave family traditionally introduced their sons, moons, and the other trainees to beast killing a full month after their awakening. That initial month, however, was strictly reserved for weapons training and sparring. During this period, the sons and moons were expected to become familiar with their weapons and test their mettle against each other in preparation for their first real battle. Asher, having only just awakened, was no exception. He would be given 1 month to master the fundamentals of his weapon before he was permitted to face a living threat. As Asher stepped into the new training ground, he was greeted by a vast, open space, larger even than the area designated for physical fitness training. At the center of the field sat a man in a lotus position, eyes closed, his presence radiating calm authority. He appeared to be meditating, undisturbed by the arrival of the trainees. But the moment he sensed their presence, he rose smoothly to his feet and spoke in a clear voice, "Form up and begin your swings." The trainees moved without hesitation. Each of them made their way to the weapon racks lining the sides of the field, selected a weapon, assumed a stance, and began their practice swings with focused determination. The weapon instructor, Clinton, turned to Asher and addressed him in a firm tone. "Since you're new here, take position over there. Your task is 1,000 slashes and thrusts, considering you wield a unique rapier." Asher wasn't the least bit surprised that Clinton knew about his weapon. He assumed the pre-march had already informed Zarek, who had likely passed the information along to the instructors overseeing the first training ground. With a silent nod, Asher walked toward the area Clinton had indicated. As he raised his hand, Virilis materialized in his palm, its blade humming softly with a faint resonance, eager, almost sentient, as if it shared Asher's anticipation for its first true use. "Excited, huh?" Asher mused. Then Asher closed his eyes. He inhaled slowly, deeply, then exhaled, steadying his breath. Entering a modest stance, he raised Virilis above his head and brought it down in an awkward downward slash. Almost instinctively, his body adjusted. His footing shifted. His breathing grew more measured. His grip repositioned ever so slightly, and he struck again. Clinton began to approach, intending to correct the boy's form. Newcomers often fumbled their first swings, especially with such a specialized weapon. But as he neared, he paused. With each swing, Asher improved. Subtly at first, but unmistakably. His form refined itself with every motion, his body learning on its own, fluid, disciplined, focused. Asher didn't seem to notice the instructor at all. He was locked in a rhythm, lost in repetition. His arms moved like clockwork, his body a finely tuned instrument executing the same movement again and again. Sweat rolled down his skin, soaking through his clothes. His violet hair clung damply to his forehead as the sun bore down, merciless and bright, but Asher never stopped. Clinton observed in silence for a moment longer before simply turning away. There was no need for interference. Returning to the center of the field, he called over the 3 trainees from earlier. Without delay, he began sparring with them, correcting their stances, testing their reactions, and refining their instincts. It was hands-on instruction, aimed at sharpening both their form and battle sense. Meanwhile, time slipped by. An hour passed, and Asher completed his 1,000 slashes with unbroken focus. Without pause, he transitioned seamlessly into thrusts. His right leg slid forward in perfect harmony with his leading hand, the point of virilis darting out with precision, then retracting smoothly. Again and again, each motion flowed into the next, as fluid as breath. His body, though drenched in sweat and trembling with fatigue, pulsed with exhilaration. Muscles ached, lungs burned, but Asher wasn't stopping. He moved as if possessed, immersed in a rhythm all his own. No thoughts, no distractions, only the blade, only the motion. His world had narrowed to the edge of virilis, and in that narrow space, he found clarity. Another hour passed, and still Asher did not pause, not for rest, not even for breath. His movements remained steady and composed. Then, at last, he halted, mid-thrust, the final motion of his 1,000th thrust complete. He stood there in silence, chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm, sweat dripping from his chin to join the pool forming at his feet. The air around him shimmered faintly with heat and effort. But instead of resting, he moved. Dropping once more into a stance, Asher surged forward, his mind and body synchronizing perfectly. Slash flowed into thrust. Thrust gave way to slash. The two motions, once distinct, now blended seamlessly into one fluid dance. His waist twisted, adjusting his center of gravity. Shoulders rolled, arms and legs moved in perfect harmony. Muscle memory from the movement training sparked to life in his mind, guiding his limbs with refined instinct. He wasn't just swinging, he was weaving. Slash, thrust, step, flow. Each element became part of a greater whole. Minutes passed before he finally stopped. His entire form was drenched, steam rising faintly from his body. He stood still, blade lowered, breath deep and even. Then, slowly, a smile crept onto his lips. So this is why everyone wants to reincarnate, he thought, amusement and exhilaration mixing in his gaze. Then he turned and met Clinton's gaze. The instructor stood frozen, eyes wide in disbelief. Around the field, the other trainees had stopped their swings, their attention locked on Asher. Some wore expressions of awe, others confusion, and a few, fear. To them, he no longer looked like a peer, but something else entirely. A monster in human form. But Asher didn't care. He had no intention of hiding his ability, simply to match the expectations set for those who awakened on their third try. Let them stare. Let them talk. It didn't matter. No one could question him. He was the last heir of a duke, the 10th son of the Wargrave family. With quiet calmness, Asher sat down on the ground, crossing his legs as his breathing slowed. He closed his eyes, shutting out the noise around him, and allowed his mind to replay everything he had experienced throughout the trainings, each movement, each sensation, each moment of growth. Zarek walked with composed grace in a direction all within the estate recognized without question. A calm, knowing smile curved his lips as he passed, and the maids and fellow butlers offered respectful greetings. After all, he was no ordinary servant. He was the personal butler of the Primarch. Before him stood a black door. Without a word or gesture, it parted on its own, and Zarek stepped inside. Inside, a man stood, golden-eyed, golden-haired, Azarin Wargrave, the Primarch of the Wargrave family. He stood by the window, engaged in an act that no one within the estate would have believed possible in their lifetime. Azarin Wargrave, the esteemed, fearsome Primarch, was smiling as he gazed out into the distance. Anyone who witnessed the scene might have thought they had fallen into an illusion. It would have been easier to convince them that the entire history of Crymora was a fabrication than to believe that Azarin Wargrave was smiling. He was a man whom few, if any, had ever seen smile. As a Wargrave, Azarin was known for bearing either a cold, unreadable expression or none at all. And yet, in that quiet moment, one of the strongest men in the world, wore a rare, gentle smile. The reason? His youngest son, Asher Wargrave, the 10th son. Zarek stepping in didn't speak or interrupt. He simply stood in place quietly. With Azarin's unparalleled perception, his senses extended across the entire Wargrave estate. At that moment, his attention was fixed on one person, Asher. The boy sat in a lotus position, eyes closed in deep focus. Azarin had been observing him from the very moment he stepped into the first training ground. He had watched him move through each challenge as though it were second nature, effortless, precise, composed. The astrosphere, which had once taken Azarin himself 5 minutes to form, was completed by Asher in less. Perfecting it had taken Azarin 20 minutes. Asher matched that feat with striking ease. The wall climb, once an hour-long ordeal for Azarin, was scaled in mere moments by his son. Even the movement and balance training, which had taken Azarin 4 days to conquer on the lowest difficulty setting, had been approached by Asher with a grace and instinct that bordered on the unnatural. And now, watching his son not only match, but surpass, every benchmark he had once set as a so-called once-in-a-millennium genius, Azarin couldn't help but smile. At last, Azarin spoke, his gaze still fixed on the horizon beyond the window. "What do they bring, Zarek?" "It was an invitation, pre-march," Zarek replied without hesitation. Azarin's expression darkened. "Do these useless nobles have nothing better to do? The Emoviri are stirring unrest. Enemy empires are slipping spies into our borders one after the other, and yet they waste their time sending me invitations to meaningless gatherings." As he spoke, the faint smile that had graced his face vanished without a trace. "But you haven't asked what the invitation is for, pre-march," Zarek said with a faint smile tugging at his lips. He had known Azarin since the moment of his birth. He understood the man in ways few ever could, his temperaments, his rare moments of amusement, his silence that spoke more than words. He knew what Azarin despised: meetings, banquets, ceremonies. Unless it involved war councils, strategies to crush rival empires, or decisive strikes against the Emoviri, such invitations were better left undelivered. If not for Asher's awakening, Azarin wouldn't have bothered returning at all. And yet, he had come, quietly, a week before the event, choosing to observe everything from the shadows. "What is the meeting about, then?" Azarin asked, his tone flat, his expression cold. He had already decided to decline, as he always did. Zarek answered with measured calm. "The royal twins' 17th birthday is a week from today. The Emperor has extended a personal invitation." At those words, the icy edge in Azarin's gaze faded, replaced by a neutral stillness. His features grew unreadable, neither tense nor relaxed, merely still. "The prince and princess," he murmured. "I suppose that is understandable. Are you planning to attend, pre-march?" Zarek asked softly. "You already know the answer to that, Zarek. You've always known me better than my own blood," Azarin replied, his gaze never shifting from the window. Zarek offered no response. He hadn't expected one. Azarin never attended such events. He would, as always, send a representative in his place. "Who will be going this time?" Zarek asked, already sorting through the names of trusted advisors in his mind, those who had become seasoned delegates at such affairs. "We'll decide that later," Azarin said curtly. "There's still a few days left to decide." His golden eyes remained fixed on the distance, not on the Empire's politics or its emperor, but on one boy alone, Asher Wargrave. Zarek's eyes followed Azarin's line of sight, settling on the first training ground below. Noting where the Primarch's attention lay, he spoke quietly. "You didn't need to frame it as a reward," he said. "With your authority, you could have placed him there outright. To anyone else, such words might have seemed bold, insolent, even. But between them it was different. Zarek hadn't overstepped. Their bond ran deeper than rank or titles. It was a trust forged over decades. When Azarin had first summoned Asher to his study, his intention had been clear. He would use his authority to personally reinstate him into the first training ground. He couldn't bear the thought of his own son wasting away in the third, surrounded by mediocrity, especially after multiple failed awakenings. At that rate, who could say how long it would have taken for Asher to make any meaningful progress? But then he saw Asher and noticed his life rank. In that moment, he chose a different path. Instead of invoking raw authority, Azarin used Asher's life rank as justification, framing the transfer as a reward. It was a cleaner move, far more palatable to others, and, in truth, a better strategy than what he had originally planned.